Welcome back to Harry's Cosmos, the channel where one quiet question becomes a whole life. Today's What If? What if the Weasleys raised Harry and Hermione as their own? If these journeys mean something to you, take a moment to hit subscribe and ring the bell so the next story always finds its way home to you. Settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. Chapter 1: The Taking in the Owls came before the milk floats that morning, and that was how the village of Ottery St. Catchpole knew, without knowing, that the world had changed. They came in twos and threes over the wet fields, brown and gray against a sky the color of dishwater, and they did not slow at the windows of sleeping houses the way owls ought to slow when they have a letter to drop. They flew with purpose eastward and then north, in such numbers that an old man walking his dog stopped on the towpath and counted 11 before he gave it up as a trick of the light. Arthur Weasley, who was not on the towpath but standing at his own kitchen window in a dressing gown gone thin at the elbows, counted 31 and stopped counting because his tea had gone cold in his hands and he had forgotten he was holding it. He had heard the news at 2 in the morning when a patroness shaped like a lynx had come through the wall of the bedroom and spoken in the clipped, exhausted voice of a woman he half knew from the Auror office. "He is gone. The Potters are dead. The boy lives. Stay home and say nothing." Then the silver light had folded itself up and vanished, and Arthur had sat on the edge of the bed with his feet on the cold floor for a long while, and Molly had not woken, and he had not woken her, because he did not have the words yet for what he had been told. Now it was nearly 6, and the owls were still flying, and Molly was up. He could hear her on the stairs. He knew her tread the way a man knows his own heartbeat, the particular complaint of the fourth step under her weight, the pause she always made at the landing to listen for the children. There were 5 of them asleep above his head, and one more curled inside her, 4 months from the world, and he thought of the count of them, while he listened to her come down. "You let it go cold," she said from the doorway. "I did." She crossed the kitchen and took the cup out of his hands without asking, and she did not scold him for it, which told him she had felt the wrongness in the house too, even sleeping. She set the cup in the sink. She stood beside him at the window with her shoulder against his arm, and together they watched a tawny owl labor across the gray toward the marsh. "There's an awful lot of them," Molly said. "Yes, Arthur." She turned her head. He kept his eyes on the field because he was afraid of what his face would do if he looked at her. "What's happened?" So he told her. He told her in the plain order it had come to him, the lynx and the voice in the 3 sentences, and he watched the owls and not his wife, and when he had finished there was a silence in the kitchen so complete that he could hear the kettle ticking as it cooled and the small sounds of the burrow settling, the creak of old timber, the far-off mutter of the ghoul in the attic turning over in its sleep. Molly did not cry. He had expected her to cry. Instead, she reached out and gripped the edge of the sink with both hands, and her knuckles went pale, and when she spoke her voice had a flatness he had heard from her exactly twice before in their marriage, both times in the bad years, both times with a name in it. "Lily," she said, "and James, yes, they had a baby. He lives, Molly, the boy lives, that's what she said, the boy lives." Molly let go of the sink. She pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth and stood that way a moment, and then she lowered it and squared herself, and Arthur understood that she had taken the grief and put it somewhere she could reach it later, when there was time, when the children were fed. "Then where is he?" she said. It was a fair question, and Arthur did not have an answer for it, and the not having sat in him uneasily through the whole of that strange day. The ministry was a madhouse. The lifts would not stop where they were called. Memos flapped against the ceilings in such flocks that they had to be batted down with rolled parchment. In the atrium a witch he did not know was weeping openly by the fountain, while a wizard in lime-green robes patted her shoulder and looked like he had been hit on the head. Everyone had the same 2 expressions and wore them turn and turn about. The first was a wild, disbelieving joy, the kind that wants to grab a stranger by the collar and shout into his face. The second was the look of a man who has been holding his breath for 11 years and cannot quite remember how to let it out. Arthur kept his head down and went to his office, which was a cupboard with a window enchanted to show weather it was never having, and he did the only thing he was any good at, which was to be unremarkable and to listen. By 11 he had pieced together the shape of it. The Potters were dead, killed in their cottage at Godric's Hollow on the night of Halloween, and the one who had hunted them was destroyed, vaporized, ended, his curse turned somehow against him by a child of 15 months who had survived it with nothing but a cut on the forehead. The Death Eaters were scattering. The Lestranges had gone to ground. Names that had been spoken in whispers for a decade were suddenly being spoken aloud, and at noon a junior clerk Arthur had once lent 2 sickles to leaned into his cupboard with her eyes bright and said, "They're calling him the boy who lived," and laughed a little wildly, and went away again before he could ask her the only thing he wanted to know. "Where is he?" He took his lunch in the atrium because he could not stomach the cupboard, and he watched the wizarding world begin to celebrate. They were shy with it at first, as people are who have forgotten how, and then they were not shy at all. By 12:30 someone had charmed the fountain to run gold instead of water. By 1 a witch from magical transport was handing round a tray of cakes she had conjured on the spot, each iced with a tiny lightning bolt, and a wizard with a great laugh was telling anyone who would stand still that he had named his new son Harry that very morning, swapped it out from Herbert, and his wife had agreed, and wasn't it a fine name, a hero's name? People raised their cups to a baby none of them had met. They drank to the boy who lived and ate cakes with his scar on them, and not one of them, so far as Arthur could tell, standing apart with his sandwich gone dry in his hand, had thought to ask the only question that mattered, which was whether the hero in question had a clean nappy and someone to rock him when he woke in the night frightened in a strange house, wherever that strange house was. That, Arthur thought, was the trouble with making a person into a story. A story did not need feeding. Story slept wherever you left it. You could love a story to pieces and never once have to get up at 3 in the morning for it, and there was a name for that kind of love, and the name was not love at all. He wrapped the rest of his sandwich in its paper and put it in his pocket for later, the way a man does who has not got the luxury of wasting bread, and he went back up to his cupboard to listen some more. It was Mafalda Hopkirk of all people who gave it to him, and she did not mean to. He met her at the lift at the end of the day, and she was clutching a stack of files against the front of her cardigan, and one of them had slipped loose and Arthur caught it for her out of long habit, and as he handed it back he saw the heading on the topmost page. Improper use of magic underage Surrey, address withheld pending placement review. And below that, in the cramped hand of whoever logged such things, a note, subject 15 Mo, no accidental magic recorded. Guardian application, Dumbledore, APWB referred, receiving household has declined custody, re-referral pending. Thank you, Arthur, Mafalda said, and took her file and got into the lift, and the doors closed on her, and Arthur Weasley stood in the corridor with the air gone strange in his lungs. Receiving household has declined custody. He went home the long way, by flew to the leaky and then on foot to a quiet corner where he could apparate without being seen, because he wanted the minute it bought him to think, and he thought, the whole way, of a child of 15 months in a house that had said no. Molly was in the garden when he came over the stile, throwing scraps to the chickens with rather more force than the chickens required. The light was going. 3 of the boys were in the orchard, distant shapes flitting between the apple trees on the 2 ancient toy brooms that hovered 6 inches off the ground, and from the open kitchen window came the smell of a stew that had been on since the morning, onions and beef and the bay leaves she grew in a pot on the sill. She read it off his face before he reached her. She always had. You found out where he is, she said. I found out where he isn't, said Arthur. He told her about the file. He told her about the line that said declined custody, and the line that said re-referral pending, and how pending in the language of the ministry could mean a day or could mean a year, and how somewhere in Surrey there was a baby who had been put down on a doorstep and picked back up and put down again, and how no one in that whole mad rejoicing building seemed to have given it a single thought past the celebrating. Molly stood very still with the scrap bowl forgotten against her hip. Behind her the chickens had given up and wandered off. The boys' voices floated down from the orchard, Bill's the loudest, then Charlie's, then a thin pipe that was Percy demanding to be allowed higher and being refused. Lily Potter, Molly said, wrote to me, did you know that, when Bill was born? I'd never have thought she'd remember me. We'd only met the once at one of those dreadful order things, and she sent a card with a little drawing on it of a baby in a pointed hat, and she wrote inside, Molly, I hear congratulations are owed, and then some. And then she had her own, and I sent her one back. We weren't friends, we might have been. There wasn't time. She set the bowl down on the wall deliberately, as a person sets down a thing they mean to be free of their hands. Gideon liked her. He said she was the only one in that whole sorry war who never once made him feel a fool for being afraid. Arthur said nothing, because the name of her brother had come into the garden, and when one of the names came, he had learned to be a wall and let her learn. Put my brothers in the ground 3 years ago this winter, Molly said, and they gave me a card from the ministry with a seal on it, and I have spent 3 years being grateful, Arthur, grateful, that I had 6 of my own to keep me too busy to lie down and die of it. And now you stand there and tell me that Lily and James are gone the same way my brothers went, and they have left one small boy behind them, and the wizarding world they died for has set him down on a step like a bottle of milk. She picked the bowl back up only to have something in her hands. We're in Surrey. Molly, you'll have the postal district. You always have the address. I have the postal district, said Arthur, and I have the name of the man who arranged it, and Molly, the name is Albus Dumbledore. That stopped her, as he had known it would. There was no name in their world that carried more weight, not even the one no one would say, and to set yourself across the path of Albus Dumbledore was a thing that grown wizards of great courage thought twice and 3 times about doing. Molly stood with the bowl in her hands and looked at him, and somewhere over the marsh the first owl of the evening called. Then Albus Dumbledore has made a mistake, Molly Weasley said, and we are going to go and help him put it right. They did not go that night. Arthur made her see the sense of that, though it cost him an hour at the table and a stew gone slightly past its best. You did not arrive on a doorstep in Surrey at 9 in the evening to remove a child the law had not yet given you. You went in daylight with your papers in order, or with the appearance of papers in order, and you spoke softly, and you let the great man feel that the idea had been at least partly his. So in the morning Arthur put on his good robes, the ones with the buttons that matched, and he sent a respectful note to a tall narrow house in London asking, with great humility, for 10 minutes of the headmaster's time on a matter concerning the welfare of a child. He was not at all sure the note would be answered. It was answered within the hour by a phoenix that landed on the Burrow's clock and dropped a single sheet of heavy paper into Arthur's hand and was gone in a flare of warmth before Molly could get a proper look at it. The paper said in a slanting, elegant hand, "Mr. Weasley, I find I am at Hogwarts until Thursday and rarely able to receive callers, but the matter you name is one close to my own thoughts, and I would not have you travel for nothing. I shall come to you." He's coming here," said Molly, going at once and quite without thinking to the state of the kitchen, which was the state any kitchen is in by 9:30 with 5 children fed out of it. "Arthur, the table, the Percy, get down off that, the headmaster of Hogwarts is. Fred, that is your brother's, give it, here he's coming here. He came at 4. There was no crack of apparition and no flare in the grate. There was simply, between one moment and the next, an old man standing at the garden gate in robes of a deep midnight blue, his beard tucked into his belt, his half-moon spectacles catching the low sun, looking up at the crooked tower of the Burrow with an expression of such frank and gentle pleasure that 2 of the boys who had been spying from the orchard forgot to be afraid of him and came running. "What a remarkable house," said Albus Dumbledore. "I do not believe I have ever seen a building that so thoroughly declines to fall down. It is a kind of magic in itself, Mr. Weasley, to keep so many stories upright on so much love and so little mortar. You must be very happy here." "We are, sir," said Arthur, and meant it, and felt the words turn slightly in his hand, because he understood that the great man had complimented his home and his marriage and his children all in one breath, and had done it sincerely, and had also, in the same breath, reminded Arthur Weasley of everything he had to lose. They did not talk in the garden. Molly would not hear of it. She had the man inside and into the best chair and a cup of tea in front of him before he had finished admiring the clock, the great battered clock on the wall with its single hand for each member of the family, all of them at present pointing at home. Dumbledore looked at the clock for some time. He looked at the 7 hands, and Arthur saw him count them, the way Arthur himself counted owls, and saw something move behind the blue eyes that was gone before he could name it. "You wish to speak to me," said Dumbledore at last, "about the welfare of a child. I think we both know which child. Shall we be plain with one another, Arthur? I find plainness saves a great deal of tea." "The Potter boy," said Arthur. "Harry, the placement has fallen through. I work in the ministry, sir. I won't pretend I don't hear things. His aunt has refused him. He's nowhere, and we would take him. We would raise him as our own. We have the room and we have the love, and we would never let him want for either." There was a long quiet. The kettle, refilled, began to sing. Out in the garden a gnome shrieked and was answered by Charlie's whoop of triumph. "I do not doubt it," said Dumbledore softly. "I have never in my life seen a house with more love in it. That is precisely the difficulty." Molly's arms came unfolded. "The difficulty, Mrs. Weasley." Dumbledore turned the full warmth of his attention on her, and it was a considerable warmth. Arthur felt it from across the room. "May I tell you a thing I have told almost no one, because it is the kind of thing that sounds like cruelty until it is understood, and even then, the night that boy survived, his mother died to save him. She stood between him and the curse, and she need not have done. She was offered her life and refused it for him. That is old magic, Molly, the oldest. It runs in the blood. While Harry can call a place home where his mother's blood dwells, that is to say with his aunt, Lily's sister, her last living kin, he is protected by his mother's sacrifice in a way no spell of mine could ever match. No follower of the man who killed her, seeking vengeance, could touch him there. There are still such followers, Molly. There will be for years. Some of them would give a great deal to find the child who unmade their master. His aunt," said Molly, "has refused him." "She is frightened," said Dumbledore. "Fear can be reasoned with in time." "He is 15 months old," said Molly Weasley, and her voice did not rise, which was somehow worse than if it had. "And you would have me leave him on the step of a woman who is frightened of him until she stops being frightened, on the strength of a charm in his blood, while not 1 mile away there is a warm bed and a place at the table and 6 children who would love him like breathing." "You speak to me of old magic, Albus Dumbledore. I will tell you about old magic. I lost 2 brothers to that war. I have given to your order and your cause every drop of blood I could spare and a good deal I could not, and I have buried Gideon and Fabian Prouet with a ministry card for a headstone, and I am done. Do you hear me? I am done burying the people that war took, and I will not stand in my own kitchen and be told that the safest place for an orphaned baby is a doorstep." Arthur had heard his wife angry. He had never heard her like this, low and level and absolutely without fear, and he saw the great old wizard across the table receive it the way the marsh receives rain and bow his head a little and consider. "There is also," said Dumbledore very gently, "the matter of what the boy will become. He is famous now, Molly, through no choice of his own. He will grow up a legend if he is not careful, and a legend is a heavy thing to be. A childhood of plainness, of ordinary hardship even, can be a great gift to such a child. It teaches him that he is a person and not a story. I had hoped to give him an ordinary boyhood far from those who would make a god of him. "You'll forgive me, sir," said Arthur, and his own quietness surprised him, "but there's nothing ordinary about being unwanted, I should know. I've spent my whole life being thought a fool for loving the wrong things, muggles and old plugs and a wife with more spirit than the ministry has rules. There's no humility in being unloved, sir. There's only a hole where a person's idea of themselves ought to go. If you want to teach that boy he's a person and not a story, then for pity's sake let him grow up in a house so full of brothers that nobody's got the time to tell him he's a legend." He spread his hands. "We'll keep his name plain. We'll not parade him. He'll be Harry Weasley to the village and Harry Potter only when he's old enough to choose it. And as for the protection, Molly's no dark family's daughter, our blood's as old and as poor as any in Britain, and the love in this house is not so very different from a mother's in the end. You said yourself, you've never seen a house with more of it." The kettle had gone quiet. Molly had not moved from the range. Out in the garden the light had gone golden long, and through the window Arthur could see Bill lift Percy onto the toy broom at last, one hand on his small back and Percy's whole body go rigid with joy. Albus Dumbledore looked at the 7 hands of the clock for a long while. "You understand," he said at last, "that I cannot give him to you wholly. The protection at his aunt's house is real, and I will not abandon it. I will tell you that he must spend some part of each year under that roof, a fortnight, no more, so that the charm renews and the wards hold. I ask that much for his safety, and I will brook no argument on it." He raised his eyes, and the blue had gone keen, and the grandfather was gone out of them, and the something else was there, the thing under the warmth, and Arthur understood that he was being permitted to win, and that the permission had conditions, and that the conditions were not, in the end, for him to set. "But the rest of the year, the days, the meals, the growing, yes. I think you may be right, Arthur Weasley. I think a house this full might be the one place in Britain where the boy who lived can learn to be only a boy. Heaven knows I have tried to think of a better, and failed." Molly made a sound. It was not quite a sob. She turned and busied herself with the teapot so that none of them would have to look at her face. "Then it's settled," said Arthur, hardly believing it. "It is begun," said Dumbledore, and rose, and his robes settled around him like water. "Which is a different thing, and a better one. I shall bring him to you myself on Sunday, and Arthur, Molly." He paused at the door with the gold light all around him, and for that moment he was only a very old man who had buried a great many people of his own. "Thank you. There are not many who would take in a stranger's grief and call it a son. The world is colder than it ought to be. You are warmer." He went out through the garden, and the boys followed him as far as the gate, and at the gate he turned and did something none of them ever forgot. He drew his wand and conjured out of the evening air a flight of 7 small golden birds that wheeled once around the children's heads, singing, and then streamed away over the orchard and burst, one after another, into sparks. The boys shrieked with delight, and Arthur, watching from the door, thought 7. He conjured 7, not 5, not 6, 7. As if he already counted him among them. As if he had decided the matter before he ever came over the stile, and had let them argue him into the thing he meant to do all along. He did not say this to Molly. He was not even sure then that it was true, but he remembered it. Sunday came gray and still, with a mist on the marsh that the sun could not burn off until noon. Molly had not slept. Arthur knew because he had not slept either, and they had lain awake in the dark not talking, 2 people listening to a house full of children and making room in their hearts in advance for one more. She had been busy since 5. She had aired the small room under the eaves that had been a box room and was now, by some violence of cleaning, a nursery. She had brought down the cot that had held all 5 boys in their turn, mended the slat that Fred had kicked loose, and set it under the window where the morning would find it. She had knitted through the night. Arthur had watched her do it, a tiny jumper in a deep marigold yellow, and on the front of it, where she put the initial of each child, she had hesitated, the needles going still in her lap, and then she had not knitted an H, she had knitted a brown stag, antlers and all, leaping. "For his father," she said when she caught Arthur looking. "James, the Potter men were stags, the old families say. He should have one thing in this house that's only his father's. He can have an H when he's old enough to ask for it." Dumbledore came at noon as the mist lifted. He did not come alone. He came with the half-giant Hagrid, whom Arthur knew a little and liked very much, and Hagrid was crying so hard into a handkerchief the size of a tablecloth that for the first minute no one could understand a word he said, and in the great crook of his arm, wrapped in a blanket, fast asleep, was the child. Molly went down the garden to meet them. She did not run. She walked with her hands already lifting, and Hagrid, sniffing, bent and laid the bundle into her arms with a care that a smaller and less careful man could never have managed, and Molly Weasley took Harry Potter against her breast and looked down into his face, and the whole garden was quiet. He had a round face and a tuft of black hair that stood up off his head no matter which way it was smoothed, and on his forehead, half hidden, a thin red mark in the shape of a lightning bolt that had not yet faded to the silver it would one day be. He slept the way only the very young sleep, completely, with his fists curled up under his chin. And as Molly held him, he stirred and screwed up his face and opened his eyes, and his eyes were green, a startling clear green, and he looked up at the round stranger's face above him with the grave, unhurried attention of a baby deciding whether a thing is safe. "Hello, my love," said Molly Weasley very softly. There you are, we've been waiting for you." And Harry Potter, who had been put down and picked up and put down again, who had been called a legend by people who had never held him, looked into the face of the woman who would raise him, and reached up one fat starfish hand and took hold of a strand of her red hair and did not cry. Arthur came and stood beside them. He put a finger into the small curled fist and felt it grip. Behind him he could hear the children gathering in the door of the house, hushed for once, even the twins, 6 pairs of eyes for Ginny rode on Bill's hip, a baby herself, 3 months old and round as a loaf, watching the new one come home. "What do we tell them?" Arthur murmured. "The truth," said Molly, not looking up from the baby's face. "That his mum and dad loved him very much, and that they can't be here, and that we're going to love him too, for them and for us, and that this is his home now and always." She touched the lightning scar with the side of her thumb once, gently, the way you touch a bruise you mean to make better, "and we'll never make him feel it, the luck of him, the weight of him. He'll just be ours, he'll just be Harry." Dumbledore stood a little apart by the gate and watched. Arthur looked at him once over the top of Molly's bent head, and the old man inclined his own, and there was the warmth in his face, the real warmth. But there was the other thing too, the keen blue thing, and it was looking not at Molly and not at Arthur, but at the lightning scar under Molly's thumb, and at the child's green eyes, with the steady, patient, faraway look of a man studying a board on which the pieces have just been set in a new and unexpected arrangement, and recalculating, behind a kind face, every move that was left to him. Then he smiled, and the look was gone, and he came forward to make his farewells, and he was only a kind old man again. They brought Harry into the house. Hagrid had to bend nearly double to get through the door, and once inside could not stand up straight, so he sat on the floor by the range, which put his head at about the level of a standing man's, and the children swarmed him, because a man that size sitting on your kitchen floor and weeping into a tablecloth is the most interesting thing that has ever happened, and he let them climb on him and pat his beard and ask him whether he was a real giant, and answered them all. And through the whole of it kept stealing glances at the baby in Molly's arms with a wonder that did not fade. Molly sat in the good chair with Harry on her knee and let the children come to him one by one, because she said a baby ought to be introduced properly and not mobbed, though with this lot a mob was generally how it ended. Bill came first, being eldest and grave with the responsibility of it, and looked at Harry seriously and said, "Hello, I'm Bill. I'm the oldest, so if anyone's mean to you, you tell me," which made Molly's eyes go bright. Charlie wanted to know at once whether Harry could ride a broom, and was disappointed to learn he could not yet, but cheered up to be told he might be taught. Percy, who was 5 and had recently learned the word responsibility and used it whenever possible, informed the baby that there were a great many rules in the house and that he, Percy, would be happy to explain them, and Harry blew a bubble of spit at him, and the twins, who were 3 and indivisible, looked at the baby and then at each other and came to some silent twin conclusion that the rest of the family would have cause to remember for years. "He's ours now," said Fred, or it might have been George. It was always hard to be sure, and at 3 impossible. "He's yours now," said Molly. "He's your brother, like Ron, like Ron." Ron was 18 months old and asleep upstairs through the entire arrival, which his family would tease him about for the rest of his life. "You've a new brother, the both of you, and a great deal of looking after him to learn." The twins absorbed this. Then as one they reached out and very solemnly each took one of Harry's hands and shook it up and down, the way they had seen their father greet the postman. And Harry, delighted, shrieked with laughter, the high helpless laughter of a baby who has just discovered that the enormous chaotic world contains other small loud creatures like himself. And that was the moment, Arthur always said afterward, that was the exact moment Harry stopped being a guest in the Burrow and started being a Weasley. In the time it takes a baby to laugh, Harry's first meal at the Burrow was a mash of carrot and potato that Molly had soft cooked and pressed through a sieve while holding him on her hip, and she fed it to him at the long scrubbed table with the whole family ranged around to watch, because in that house an event was anything more than 4 people doing a thing at once. She had set him in the high chair that had held 5 before him, sanded smooth at the arms by 5 sets of gripping hands, and she tied a cloth round his neck and made the spoon fly the short way from the bowl to his mouth in a loop that Charlie called the broom dive and the twins called the dragon, and Harry, it turned out, called good, because he opened his mouth for it every time and banged the tray with both fists for more. "There's a place for you at this table now," Molly told him between spoonfuls, in the conversational way she talked to all her babies, in the certainty that they understood every word, which Arthur had come to suspect they half did. "Right here, between Ron and the wall, where I can keep an eye on you. There'll always be a place. You hear me? However many of you there are, this table grows another foot when it has to. It always has." She caught a dribble of carrot on the edge of the spoon and returned it neatly to its owner. Two of my own at this end can't be trusted with a fork yet either, so you're in good company, my love. Bill at the far end had quietly laid a place anyway, a small spoon, a cup with a chip he'd turned to the back so it wouldn't show, at the spot his mother had named, and no one remarked on it, but Molly saw and reached over and pressed her son's shoulder, and that was its own kind of welcome. When the introductions were done and Hagrid had gone, ducking and dripping, back through the gate with Dumbledore, and the great old wizard had given Harry one last unreadable look and vanished between one step and the next, Molly carried the baby to the clock on the wall. Arthur came to stand with her. The clock was the oldest thing they owned, older than their marriage. It had been Molly's grandmother's, and it did not tell the time, it told something better. Around its golden face, where the numbers would be on an ordinary clock, were words: home, school, work, traveling, lost, prison, mortal peril. And against the face were the hands, one for each of them, each tipped with a tiny photograph of a face, and on this ordinary, extraordinary afternoon all of them, Molly and Arthur and Bill and Charlie and Percy and Fred and George and Ron and Ginny, pointed steady at home. "It won't have a hand for him," said Molly. "It only makes them for blood. My grand's clock, it knows the family." There was a roughness in her voice, I'd hoped. But even as she said it, the clock made a sound it had never made in Arthur's hearing, a deep soft chime like a bell heard underwater, and the golden face shivered, and out of the metal at the center, slowly, the way a plant grows if you could watch it grow, a new hand pushed itself into being. It was a little brighter than the others, being new. It swung once around the whole face, past lost, past mortal peril, reading the house and everyone in it, and then it came to rest firmly with the others at home, and at its tip was a tiny round photograph that none of them had put there. A baby with a tuft of black hair and a thin scar and a pair of startling green eyes, looking out and laughing. Molly Weasley put her hand over her mouth. Arthur put his arm around her and the baby both and drew them in, and the children gathered round the clock to see, pushing and exclaiming, and Hagrid's handkerchief was still on the floor where he had dropped it, the size of a tablecloth, and somewhere upstairs Ron woke at last and began to cry to be let down into the noise, and the Burrow was, for the first afternoon of a great many afternoons, exactly as full as it was ever meant to be. "Welcome home, Harry," said Arthur Weasley to the baby, and the clock kept its new hand at home and held it there. That night when the house was finally quiet, when the boys were down and Ginny was fed and Ron had been sung back to sleep, Molly and Arthur stood together in the doorway of the little room under the eaves and watched the new baby sleep in the old cot. He had gone down hard, worn out by the day, by the hands shaking his and the giant weeping over him and the strange ceiling and the smell of a house that was not the one he had been born in. Molly had sung to him, the song she had sung to all of them, a Pruett song her own mother had sung about a boat and a star and a way home, and he had fought it for a while with his green eyes wide and watchful, and then he had lost, the way they all lose, and slept. "They'll have questions," Arthur said quietly. "When they're older he'll have questions about who he is, about them." "Then we'll answer them," said Molly. "Honestly, everyone, he'll grow up knowing exactly who his mum and dad were and exactly how they loved him. We're not replacing them, Arthur. You can't replace a thing like that, and you oughtn't try. We're just adding on." She smiled in the dark, and he heard it more than saw it. "This house knows about adding on. Look at it. It hasn't got two right angles in it. We just build another room whenever there's a new person to love, and somehow the whole crooked business stays up." Arthur thought of the great old wizard at the gate, of the 7 golden birds, of the keen blue look that had rested on the child's scar a beat too long. He thought of some part of each year under that roof, and of the matter of what the boy will become, and of a kind face that had let itself be argued into a thing it had already decided. He looked at his wife in the half-dark, lit by the nightlight she had charmed to give off a soft gold glow, and she was watching the baby breathe with all the fierce, uncomplicated love she had given to 5 others and had not, it turned out, run out of, would never run out of, the bottomless, impossible love of her, and he decided that whatever the old man wanted, whatever board the boy had been set down on without his knowing, there was at least this: that the piece had been moved to a square no one had planned, into the middle of a family that would close around him like a hand around a candle flame, and that this, of all the things that had happened on that strange gray day, was the one thing Albus Dumbledore had not been able to arrange and could not now undo. "We'll watch out for him," Arthur said, "all his life, whatever's coming." "Whatever's coming," Molly agreed. In the cot Harry Potter slept on, in a house held up by love and very little mortar, under a marigold jumper with a leaping stag where his initial should be, the stories of family breathing around him in the dark, and on the kitchen wall below, the clock kept his new hand steady at home, where it would stay, through everything that came after, for a very long time. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The girl who came in winter. By the time Harry was 6 he could have walked the Burrow blindfolded, which he had in fact done twice on a dare from the twins, and broken a vase the second time that Molly mendied without ever quite believing his story about the wind. He knew the house the way he knew his own teeth. He knew that the 3rd stair from the bottom groaned and the 7th did not, so that a person creeping down for an early biscuit should skip the 3rd. He knew that the kitchen tap ran hot if you asked it nicely and cold if you swore at it, which was Fred's discovery and the cause of much swearing. He knew where the ghoul lived and that it was nothing to be afraid of, only lonely and fond of banging the pipes, and that if you banged back twice it banged back once, which Harry privately thought was the ghoul saying good night. He knew the smell of the kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, wood smoke and porridge, and the particular green smell of whatever Molly had hung to dry over the range, and he knew that this smell meant the day had not gone wrong yet and might not. On the morning everything changed, he was lying on his stomach on the rug in front of the fire, helping Ron not at all with a jigsaw of a Quidditch pitch that was missing 4 pieces, while Ginny tried to eat one of the 4 missing pieces and was prevented. He was a small boy for 6, dark and quick, with a scar he never thought about under hair that no comb had ever defeated, and he was happy in the unthinking way of a child who has never had cause to wonder whether he will be fed. He knew he was a Potter. He had always known. Molly and Arthur had told him before he could understand it and gone on telling him until he could, so that the knowing had grown up alongside him and never once arrived as a shock. He knew his mother's name was Lily and that she had green eyes like his and had been clever and brave, and that his father's name was James and that he had liked to make people laugh and had ridden a broom like he was stitched to it. He knew they had loved him and that a bad man had killed them and that the same bad man was gone now. He kept all of this in a particular place inside himself, the way Bill kept his first wand in a box under his bed, though he had a better one now, not because he played with it, but because it was his. What he did not know that morning was that he was about to stop being the only one in the house who kept such a box. Arthur came home early. That alone was strange enough to make Ron look up from the jigsaw. He came in stamping snow off his boots and did not take off his coat, and he found Molly at the range and spoke to her low with his hand on her arm, and Harry watched the back of his mother's neck go still in the way that meant something serious had come into the kitchen. "Where?" said Molly. "A children's home outside Bristol, Muggle. She's been there since the summer." Arthur lowered his voice further, but Harry had learned to hear under voices the way you learn to see in the dark. "Car accident, Molly. Both parents on the motorway back in June. She was at her grandmother's that weekend, which is why she's here at all, and the grandmother passed in the autumn heart and there's no one else. No aunts, no uncles, only child of only children." He took a breath, and the magic started badly. "She doesn't know what it is. She's 6 and she's frightened out of her wits, and every time she's frightened things happen. Books off shelves. Frost on the inside of the windows in August. A boy who was unkind to her woke up the next morning speaking nothing but French, and the Muggles can't explain it, and they've moved her 3 times because the houses keep sending her back." The jigsaw was entirely forgotten. Ron's mouth was open. Ginny had succeeded in eating the piece. "The improper use office flagged it weeks ago," Arthur went on, "but nobody wanted the bother of a Muggle born with no kin, you know how they are, and it sat, Molly. And then it came across Dumbledore's desk because he watches for them, the ones with no one, and he thought of us." There was a silence in which the fire popped and Harry's heart did something complicated. "How old?" said Molly. 6, 7 in September. "What's her name?" "Hermione," said Arthur. "Hermione Granger." Molly put down the spoon she had been holding the entire time. She wiped her hands on her apron, slowly, and Harry knew, before she said a word, what she was going to say, because he had heard the story of his own arrival enough times to know the sound a decision makes in his mother's chest. "Then we'd best air the little room next to Ginny's," said Molly Weasley. "And someone fetch the camp bed down for now, and Harry, love, go and tell the twins that if there is one prank in the first month that child is under this roof, I will turn the pair of them into garden gnomes and let the others throw them over the wall." "Go on," Harry went, but at the door he stopped and turned back because there was a question in him too big to leave behind. "Mum," he said, "is she going to be ours like I'm ours?" Molly looked at him across the warm chaos of the kitchen, at the small dark boy in the doorway who had asked the only question that mattered, and her face did the thing it did when she was trying not to let her eyes go bright in front of the children. "That's not for us to decide all at once," she said. "It has to be for her in her own time. But Harry," she came and crouched down in front of him and took both his hands. "You came here frightened too. You won't remember it, you were too small. But you came into a house full of strangers who were very loud, and you didn't know any of us, and we asked you to call it home. It's a hard thing we're asking of her, harder because she's old enough to know what she's lost." She pressed his hands. "You know that feeling better than anyone in this house, so you'll be the one to help me, won't you? You'll be the one who knows." Harry nodded because it was true, and because his mother had just handed him a job, and a job from Molly Weasley was a kind of love you could carry in both hands. She came on the last Saturday before Christmas in the worst of the cold, with snow lying blue in the orchard, and the pond frozen hard enough for Charlie to have already cracked his head on it once. Dumbledore did not bring her. A witch from the Department of Magical Family Services brought her, a brisk, kind woman named Mrs. Tibbs, who held the child's hand a little too tightly and kept up a stream of bright reassurance that fooled no one, least of all the child. Harry watched them come up the lane from the window in the front room, where he had been posted since breakfast and had refused all attempts to dislodge him, and he saw the girl before he saw her face. a small figure in a gray Muggle coat too thin for the weather, walking carefully on the ice, carrying not a bag, not a toy, but a book, held against her chest with both arms the way Harry held the idea of his parents. Then Mrs. Tibbs knocked, and Molly opened the door, and the whole roaring warmth of the Burrow fell on the child at once. The heat and the noise and the smell of baking and 7 Weasleys plus 1 Potter trying very hard, and failing to seem fewer than they were, and the girl stood on the step and went absolutely white and absolutely still, and Harry saw her arms tighten on the book until the knuckles stood out, and he knew that look. He had never worn it that he could remember, but he knew it the way you know a word in a language you spoke as a baby. It was the look of someone bracing to be sent back. "Hello," said Molly, and she did not crouch and coo, which Harry understood at once was exactly right. She spoke to the girl the way she spoke to Bill, as a person. "You'll be Hermione, I'm Molly. It's perishing out here, come in by the fire before we all freeze to the step, and mind the cat she bites, she's the only one in this house who does. Come in, come in." Hermione Granger came in. She came in the way a person walks into cold water. And the Weasleys, who had been sternly instructed and were trying, descended anyway, because they could no more help it than the river can help running downhill. And there were too many names too fast, Bill and Charlie and Percy and Fred and George and Ron and Ginny. And the girl's eyes went from face to face, getting wider and wider, and Harry watched the book come up higher against her chest and watched her start very slightly to shake. He did the only thing he could think of. He pushed through his own family, which took some doing, and he came and stood in front of her, not too close, and he looked at the book instead of at her, which he had learned from Arthur was how you talk to a frightened creature. "What are you reading?" said Harry. The shaking stopped, just like that. The girl looked at him, this small dark boy who had asked her the one question in the world she knew how to answer, and something behind her eyes took hold of itself. "Tales of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table," she said in a rush, in a voice gone high and careful. "It's the children's edition, it isn't the proper one's much longer, but they only had this at the where I was. I've read it 4 times, I'm on the 5th. She stopped, as though she had said too much, having learned that saying too much was a thing people punished you for, and her chin came up a little, ready for it. "Is it good?" said Harry. She blinked. Yes, it's very good. There's a sword in a stone, and only the true king can pull it out, and everyone tries and they can't, and then a boy does it by accident because he just needed a sword for someone else and his was lost. He wasn't even trying to be king, he just needed a sword." The words were tumbling now faster, the high careful voice warming. "And the wizard Merlin, he knew the whole time, he set it all up, only nobody believed him because he talked strangely and he knew things he shouldn't." "We've got a wizard," said Harry. Hermione looked at him as a person looks at someone who has said something kind but mad. "We've got loads of wizards, actually," said Harry. "Everyone here's a wizard or a witch. That's what the strange things are when you get frightened and things happen. It's magic, you're a witch, that's all it is. It's not bad and it's not broken, and it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, it means you're like us." He said it plainly, the way it had been said to him, the way the most important things in his life had always been said to him, across a kitchen table by people who loved him. "Nobody's going to send you back for it here. It's the one house in the world where it's the most ordinary thing there is." The girl stared at him. Her arms loosened on the book, just slightly, just enough. And from the kitchen Molly's voice called that there were mince pies and they would not eat themselves, and the family surged toward the smell. And for one moment in the cooling hall it was only the two of them, the boy who knew and the girl who was just beginning to. "What's your name?" Hermione asked Harry. "Are you their brother?" He thought about how to say it. He had never had to say it before. Everyone he knew already knew. "I'm theirs," he said. "They took me in when I was a baby. My mum and dad died too." He had never said it to a stranger. It came out steadier than he expected. "So I know about the box you keep inside you for the people. I know about that." Hermione Granger looked at Harry Potter for a long moment in the cold hall, with the noise of his enormous family rising and falling beyond the door, and something happened in her face that was not a smile, not yet, but was the place a smile would one day grow from. "All right," she said. And she went into the mince pies, and she sat next to Harry, and she did not let go of the book, but she ate 3. The first week was hard, and Harry, who had been given a job, did it the way he did everything that mattered, which was completely. Hermione did not cry where they could see her. She was unfailingly polite, which was its own kind of alarming in a house where politeness ran a distant fourth behind appetite volume and getting there first. She thanked Molly for every meal in full sentences. She made her camp bed so tightly that Charlie tried to bounce a nut off it. She answered every question put to her and asked none of her own, and at night Harry, whose room was across the narrow landing, heard the small sounds through the wall that she was careful to make only in the dark. He did not tell anyone. It was not the kind of thing you told, but he started leaving things outside her door. The first night it was a sherbet lemon, because Percy had a hoard and Percy could be reasoned with. The second night it was a feather from the great gray owl that lived in the barn, because he had seen her watching the owls. The third night it was a drawing he had done badly of the clock on the kitchen wall, with all the hands at home, and on the back he had written in the careful capitals he was proud of, "This is the family clock. There is room." He pushed it under the door and went back to bed and lay listening, and after a while he heard the paper move and then nothing, and in the morning the drawing was gone from the floor and he never saw it again, and 3 days later, helping her carry washing, he glimpsed it pinned to the wall above the camp bed, smoothed flat, the creases pressed out. The magic came the way Arthur had said it would, on the back of fear. It was Fred and George, and they did not mean harm, which Molly pointed out at considerable volume afterward made it worse, not better, because thoughtlessness was a choice too. They had rigged the door of the broom shed, a standard trick, a bucket, and they had meant it for Ron, and Hermione, sent out to fetch the egg basket, opened it instead. She was not hurt. It was only water, and not even cold water. The twins had at least heated it. But she was 6, and she was in a strange place, and she had spent 4 houses learning that when things went wrong it was sent back to her, and she stood in the snow soaked and shaking with the broken egg basket at her feet, and every window in the broom shed blew out at once. Not outward, inward. The glass did not shatter and fall, it crazed all over in the same instant into a white frost lace of cracks, every pane and held, and then a cold came off the shed that turned the slush to ice underfoot in a ring 3 yards wide, and the twins, who had come running to own up, skidded to a halt at the edge of it and went, both of them, the color of the snow. Harry walked into the ring. He felt the cold of it bite through his jumper, and he kept walking, because he had understood something in that instant that the twins, older and cleverer, had not, that the worst thing in the world you could do to Hermione Granger right now was be afraid of her. He walked up to her over the ice that her terror had made, and he picked up the egg basket, which was beyond saving, and he set it upright anyway, because it seemed important to put things back the way they went. "It's all right," he said. "It's only the shed. Dad's been wanting an excuse to put proper glass in for years." "I didn't," Hermione said. Her teeth were going. "I didn't mean I don't know how I know." He took off his own jumper, the marigold one with the stag on it that Molly had let out twice, and he put it over her wet shoulders, and the wool was warm from him. "Nobody means it. That's the whole thing about it. Mum says magic's like sneezing when you're small. It just comes out, and you learn to hold it the way you learn to hold a sneeze, and until you learn it's nobody's fault, not even a little bit." He looked at the frosted windows, at the ring of ice, with frank admiration. "Anyway, this is brilliant. You did all the windows at once. I can't do anything yet. Ron made a teapot dance once and was sick after." And Hermione Granger, soaked to the skin, standing in a circle of ice she had made out of being frightened, looked at the wreck of the broom shed and then at Harry, and made a sound that was half a sob and half, unmistakably, the first laugh anyone in the Burrow had heard out of her. Molly came out then with the twins already cringing, and she took one look and gathered the girl up, ice and all, against the front of her, the way she gathered all of them, and over the top of Hermione's head she gave Fred and George a look that promised a reckoning, and she carried the child inside to the fire. But Harry saw the thing the others missed. He saw that when Molly's arms came around her, Hermione did not go stiff the way she had on the doorstep a week before. She held on. For the first time, soaked and shaking, she held on. After that, the house got the measure of her, and she got the measure of the house, and the long task of becoming a family did what it does, which is to happen so slowly you cannot see it, and then to have happened all at once. Arthur was her first ally after Harry. He found her on a gray afternoon, standing in front of the kitchen tap and the toaster he had rescued from a skip, asking them silent, furious questions, and instead of shooing her off he pulled up 2 stools and they took the toaster apart together on the table, and she explained electricity to him, all of it in her high, careful voice, the wire and the current and the little glowing element, and Arthur Weasley listened to a 6-year-old explain the toaster with the rapt face of a man at a symphony, and asked her question after question, every one of which she could answer, and at the end of it he sat back and said, "Hermione Granger, I have been trying to understand the eccentricity for 20 years, and you have explained it to me in an afternoon. You are the cleverest person ever to sit at this table, and that includes everyone who has ever sat at this table." And she went pink to the ears and could not speak, and Arthur, who knew exactly what he had done, went whistling out to his shed. Molly's campaign was conducted, as all Molly's campaigns were, through the stomach and the needles. She fed the child relentlessly and watched the sharp little wrists begin to fill out. And one evening in the new year she presented Hermione with a jumper, knitted in a dark glad red, and on the front where Harry's had a stag, this one had a small brown otter mid-tumble, paws out. "Why an otter?" Hermione asked, holding it, not yet daring to be pleased. "Because Harry's father's people were stags," said Molly, "and a body ought to have a creature of her own, and I sat and thought about you a good long while, and an otter was what came. They're clever otters, cleverest thing in the river, never still, always at something, taking things apart to see how they work, and they look like they're playing even when they're working, which is the best way to do anything." She did not look up from her knitting as she said it. "They keep hold of each other when they sleep, so they don't drift apart on the current. Did you know that? They hold hands." Hermione put the jumper on. She wore it until the elbows went, and then Molly let it out, and then she wore it some more. The reading nook was Harry's gift, though he would never have called it a gift. There was a window seat on the first-floor landing, a deep one, with a cushion gone flat and a view of the orchard, and nobody used it because it was drafty and the cushion was flat. Harry dragged a second cushion up and a blanket and the lamp that nobody wanted because it flickered, and he installed Hermione there with her King Arthur book on a wet Sunday and sat down on the floor beside her and said, "Read it to me, the sword part." She read him the sword part, then she read him the rest. Then when the King Arthur book was finished, she read him Charlie's old dragon books and Percy's history of Hogwarts that Percy had never finished, and the back of the cereal box, and a ministry pamphlet on cauldron safety that she made unaccountably gripping. And Harry, who could not sit still for any of his brothers, sat still for her, hour on the flat cushion in the drafty window, and learned that there was a kind of magic that came not out of fear but out of a quiet voice and a turning page, and that the girl who had arrived shaking on the doorstep had more of it in her than the whole rest of the house put together. He taught her things too. He taught her to fly on the toy broom in the orchard, 6 inches off the ground, and she was terrible at it, the only thing in his memory she was ever terrible at, and she hated being terrible at it with a passion that made Ron weep with laughter, and she kept at it anyway, white-faced and grim, until she could wobble the length of the orchard because Hermione Granger did not leave a thing half-learned. He taught her the 3rd stair groaned and the 7th did not. He taught her to bang back at the ghoul. He taught her on a freezing night when she could not sleep, the Pruett song about the boat and the star in the way home, which Molly had sung to him, and which he sang to her badly through the wall, and which after a while he heard her humming back. Christmas came 4 days after she did, and it nearly undid her, though not in the way the family feared. Harry woke before light to the weight of a stocking on the end of his bed, the same lumpy hand-knitted stocking he woke to every year, and he lay in the dark feeling the shapes of tangerine and chocolate frog and nut through the wool. And then he remembered, the way you remember a tooth coming through, that there was someone across the landing for whom this would be the first Christmas without the voices that did the reading and the whistle that called the dog. He got up and crossed to her door in his bare feet on the cold boards, and he found her already awake, sitting up very straight in the gray dark, holding a stocking she plainly did not know she was allowed to open. "It's got my name on it," Hermione said in a whisper, as though saying it too loud might make it not so. "Mrs. Weasley knitted my name on it. When did she? There wasn't time." "She stays up," said Harry. "She does it after we're down." "She did mine the first year too, with the stag, before I had an H." He sat on the end of her camp bed, which was the thing you did on Christmas. You went room to room until the whole family had collected like snow rolling downhill into the kitchen. "You're meant to open it, that's the rule. The only rule Mum doesn't mind you breaking is the one about not eating chocolate before breakfast today." She opened it the way she did everything that frightened her, carefully and then all at once. There was a tangerine and a bag of Bertie Botts that the twins had clearly been at, and a hair ribbon the exact red of the otter jumper, and a small battered second-hand copy of A History of Magic with the price still penciled inside that Molly must have hunted down in the week she had, and at the bottom, wrapped in newspaper, a thing Harry had made. A wooden box no bigger than her 2 hands that Arthur had helped him sand and hinge in the shed, plain, unvarnished, empty. "It's for the box you keep inside you," Harry said, suddenly not sure it had been a good idea. "I thought maybe you'd want a real one as well, for anything of theirs you've still got, so it's somewhere safe, you don't have to, I just thought." Hermione held the little wooden box in both hands the way she had held the King Arthur book on the doorstep, the way she held anything she could not bear to lose. She did not say thank you in a full, polite sentence. She did not say anything at all. She put it down very gently on the blanket, and then she put her arms around Harry's neck, hard, the first time she had ever reached for him instead of the other way round, and held on, and he held on back, and downstairs they could hear the house beginning to wake, Ron thundering, Ginny shrieking, Molly calling that if everyone was not at the table in 10 minutes the bacon would be given to the chickens. "Come on," said Harry when she let go, "before Ron eats the lot." "He will, he's done it before. He ate an entire goose once and cried about it after." She put on the otter jumper over her nightdress, and she tied the red ribbon in her hair, and she carried the little wooden box down with her, and she set it on the windowsill above the table where the morning would find it, and she came to her place between Harry and the wall, and ate, on her first Christmas at the Burrow, more breakfast than Percy. Dumbledore came in February when the snow had gone gray and stubborn and the lane was all mud. He came, he said, to see how the placement was settling, which was the kind of thing the department might send a clerk to do, and did not, as a rule, send the chief warlock of the Wisengamot. Molly fussed and produced the good cups. Arthur stood a little straighter. And Harry, who had been 6 the last time the old man came and did not remember it, watched from the stairs with Hermione beside him and felt, without being able to name it, that the temperature of the house had changed in a way the fire could not fix. Dumbledore was kind. That was the first thing, and it was not a lie. The kindness was real. Harry could tell real from false the way all loved children can. He admired the clock. He praised Molly's seed cake to a degree that made her flap. Asked Arthur intelligent questions about the workings of the misuse of Muggle artifacts office and listened to the answers. And then over the second cup he turned his attention up the stairs, to the 2 children watching through the banister, and he smiled, and the smile reached his eyes, and behind his eyes was the other thing, the keen thing, the thing that was taking the measure of the room and everyone in it and adding them up. And this, he said, must be Miss Granger. Come down, child, and let me look at you. I am told you blew out every window in a shed at once, which is a remarkable piece of magic for a girl of 6 who has had no instruction whatsoever. I have known grown wizards who could not manage it in a temper. Hermione came down because she had been told to by the most important wizard in the world, but she came down with her chin up in the otter jumper, and she did not shake. Harry came with her. He did not decide to, he simply found himself on the stairs beside her, a half step ahead, and he did not move out of it. It was an accident, Hermione said. I didn't mean to do it. The best magic frequently is, said Dumbledore to begin with. Tell me, Miss Granger, how are you finding the wizarding world? You have been thrown into rather the deep end of it, I'm afraid. It's better than the other end, said Hermione. The old man laughed, a real laugh, delighted, and Molly relaxed by a degree, and Harry did not, because he had been watching the eyes, and the eyes had not laughed. The eyes had moved in the instant before the laugh from Hermione to Harry and back, to the half-step he stood ahead of her, to the way she had glanced at him before she answered, the small unconscious check, are you here, before she spoke, and the eyes had marked it and weighed it and set it down somewhere careful. You have settled well, Harry, Dumbledore said, turning the full warmth on him now, and it was a considerable warmth, and Harry understood why grown men did as this man asked. You are happy here? Yes, sir. Good, that is good. It is what I wished for you, you know, above all things. And this too was true, and that was the part Harry would only understand years later, that the man meant it, that the wanting Harry to be happy and the using Harry for something were not opposites in him, but lived side by side, the left hand and the right. And you have made a friend. She's my sister, said Harry. It came out before he had thought it. He felt Hermione go still beside him. He had not asked her, he had not asked anyone. It was not technically settled. Molly had said so herself in the kitchen on the first day. But it had come up out of him whole and certain, and having said it he found he would not take it back, not for the chief warlock of the Wisengamot, not for anyone. There was a small silence on the stairs. Is she? Said Dumbledore softly. He looked at the two of them, the dark boy and the bushy-haired girl, standing close on the narrow stair in their mismatched jumpers, the stag and the otter, and for a moment the keen thing in his eyes was very visible indeed, and what was in it was not unkindness but calculation, the patient, ceaseless arithmetic of a man who has built his whole life out of moving people toward ends they cannot see, and who has just been shown on a staircase in a crooked house, a sum he had not put into his accounts. Yes. I see that she is, he left soon after. He was gentle to the last and gave Hermione a sherbet lemon from a paper bag and told her that Hogwarts would be lucky to have a mind like hers, and patted Harry once on the shoulder, and the pat was warm and the hand was kind, and Harry felt, under the kindness, the weight of a man reaching out to touch a thing he meant to keep track of. At the gate Arthur saw him off, and Harry, watching from the window with Hermione, saw the old man pause and look back at the house for a long moment before he turned on the spot and was gone, and the look on his face was the look of a chess player who has lost a piece he was fond of to a move he did not see coming, and is not angry, only thoughtful and already counting forward. He's strange, Hermione said when the lane was empty. He's kind, but he's strange. Except you like your sum he's doing. Harry looked at her, 6 years old, and she had seen in 20 minutes the thing it would take the grown wizards in this story years to see, the thing Arthur had half seen at a garden gate 5 winters before and never quite said aloud. Yeah, said Harry, he does. Do you trust him? Harry thought about it, the way Arthur had taught him to think about things all the way to the bottom before you answered. I trust that he wants something good, Harry said slowly. I just don't think he always knows the difference between something good and something he wants. He shrugged, 6 years old, out of his depth and somehow exactly right. Mum says you can love someone and still get them wrong. I think he loves the whole world. I just don't think he's met it close up in a while. Hermione considered this. Then she nodded once, the firm nod he would come to know better than his own name, the nod that meant a thing had been thought through and decided and would not need revisiting. I'll keep an eye on him, she said. I'm good at keeping an eye on things. I know you are, said Harry. That night Molly took Hermione to the clock. She did it quietly after the others were down, with only Harry and Arthur there, because she said some things ought not to be done in a crowd. She lifted the girl up so she could see the great golden face, the words around the rim, home and school and lost in mortal peril, and the hands, one for each of them, 10 of them now, all pointing steady at home. This is my grandmother's clock, Molly said. It's a family clock. It only knows blood. It made a hand for every one of my children when they were born, and it made a hand for Harry the day he came, which it had never done before for someone not born to it, and I have wondered ever since whether it knew something I didn't about what makes a family. She set the girl down. Her voice had the roughness in it that Harry knew. I don't know if it'll make one for you, sweetheart. It might not. It's an old thing and it has its own mind, and I'll not have you hurt if it doesn't. But I wanted you to see it. I wanted you to know there's a wall in this house where the family lives, and that whether the clock decides for you or not, you are on it. Do you understand me? You're on it whatever the clock says. That part isn't up to the clock. That part's up to me, and it's decided. Hermione looked at the clock. She did not reach for it. She had learned in 4 houses not to reach for things in case they were taken away, and the clock chimed. It was the deep, soft underwater bell that Harry had heard only in the story of his own arrival, never with his own ears, and the golden face shivered, and out of the center slowly, the way the slow hand of a clock moves if you watch it long enough to be sure, a new hand grew. It was brighter than the others, being new. It came out and it swung once around the whole face past lost, where the child had been so very nearly lost, past mortal peril, and it hung there a moment over mortal peril, the longest moment of Harry's life to that point, and then it swept round and came to rest, firm and sure, with all the others at home. And at its tip was a small round photograph that none of them had put there, a girl with a great deal of hair and a book held against her chest and her chin up, looking out, and just beginning, to smile. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Hermione Granger made a sound, the sound she had not let any of them hear in the dark through the wall, and Molly caught her up, and Arthur put his arm around the both of them, and Harry stood looking at the 11th hand of his grandmother's clock, his sister's hand, pointing at home, and felt the particular fullness of a thing that has clicked at last into the place it was always shaped for. Later, much later, when the house was finally quiet, Harry tapped on the wall twice. After a moment, 2 taps came back. Then he got up in his pajamas and went and sat in the reading nook on the drafty landing, and after a while Hermione came out too, in the otter jumper over her nightdress, with a blanket, and sat down beside him, and they looked out at the orchard, where the moon had turned the old snow to silver and the apple trees stood up black against it. "Harry," Hermione said, "when you told the wizard I was your sister, I meant it. I know you meant it." "That's not what I—" She stopped and tried again in the high, careful voice that was getting less careful by the day. "My mum and dad, I don't want to stop. I don't want anyone to think that because of the clock, I have to stop having had them. They were mine. Dad used to do voices when he read to me. Mum could whistle through her teeth and the dog would come from anywhere in the house. They were mine and they're gone, and I don't want to put them down to pick this up." "You don't have to," said Harry. "That's the whole thing. Nobody here'll ever ask you to." He looked out at the silver orchard, at the black trees, at the moon. "I've got a box inside me for mine, Lily and James. I told you that the first day. And getting a mum and a dad here didn't make the box go away. It just meant I had room for the box in them as well. You don't run out of room. That's the thing Mum knows that nobody else knows. You think you'll run out of room and you never do." He paused. "We can put yours next to mine, the boxes, if you like, so they're not on their own in there." Hermione was quiet for a long time. Out in the orchard an owl crossed the moon. "All right," she said in a small, steady voice, "next to yours." They sat in the reading nook until the cold drove them in, the boy who had known and the girl who had learned. 2 children who between them had lost 4 parents and found 1 family, and below them on the kitchen wall in the dark the clock kept its 11th hand at home, beside the 10th, the otter beside the stag, where they would stay, side by side, through everything that was coming, for a very long time. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The Burrow years. The summer Harry turned 8, the orchard became a Quidditch pitch and stayed one for the rest of his childhood. It was Charlie's doing. Charlie was 15 that year and Gryffindor's youngest seeker in living memory, home for the holidays with a tan and a swagger and an old set of bludgers he had borrowed, in the loosest sense of the word, from the school shed. He set up 2 apple crates at either end of the longest gap between the trees, 3 feet off the ground at one end and 4 at the other because the ground sloped, and he announced that the rules were whatever they could all agree on, which meant the rules were a state of permanent armed negotiation. They played on the toy brooms, which by then had been mended so many times that Arthur said they were more spell-tape than broomstick, and which would not go higher than the lowest apple boughs nor faster than a trotting dog. It did not matter to Harry that first summer of real games. Going 6 feet up on a broom that wobbled was the finest thing the world contained. He took to it the way some children take to water, all at once and without thinking, and within a fortnight he could do things on the patched old toy broom that made Charlie stop refereeing to watch. "Look at him," Charlie said to Bill Lowe on an evening gone gold and midge-thick, while Harry threw the broom into a turn around the gnarled crabapple that no one had taught him and no one should have survived. "Bill, look at him. That's not learned. You can't learn that. James could do that. I saw a picture once, James Potter at school, hanging off a broom by his knees to catch a quaffle, and everyone said it was a fluke, and that's not a fluke, that's— look at him, he's 8. "Don't tell Mum he hangs off by his knees," said Bill. "I'm telling Mum nothing," said Charlie. "I want to keep being allowed home." Hermione did not fly if she could help it. She had learned, the hard winter she arrived, to wobble the length of the orchard, and having proved she declined ever to do it again, on the grounds that a broom was a profoundly unsound piece of engineering, and she had read the casualty figures. Instead she appointed herself, over loud objection, the keeper of the score and the rules, and within 1 summer the loud objection had stopped, because it turned out that a game refereed by Hermione Granger was a far better game than a game refereed by whoever shouted loudest, which had been Ron. "That was a foul," she would say, not looking up from the notebook she kept the rules in, a notebook that grew thicker every week. "It was never," Ron would say. "You flew through the goal line to block, which is a foul under Rule 11, which you agreed to on Tuesday. I have it here, you signed it." She would hold up the notebook. Ron had in fact signed it. She made them all sign amendments, which Fred said was the most sinister thing he had ever heard of, and George said was probably illegal, and both of them signed anyway because the alternative was Hermione refusing to keep score, and a game without Hermione keeping score descended into chaos and tears within minutes, usually Ron's. It was Harry who understood, before any of them, what she was really doing. She was not interested in the rules. She was interested in fairness, which is a different and larger thing, and the rules were only how she got at it. On the long evenings Broom put away, when the family sat out on the grass watching the bats come out, he would sit with her on the orchard wall while she added up the week's scores by wandlight, and he would watch her make sure quietly that whoever had lost most that week got the next captaincy, that Percy, who was hopeless, got a position where his hopelessness mattered least and his fussing mattered most, that Ginny, who was small and savage and wanted in so badly she shook with it, got given a real go and not a baby's go. You fix it so everyone gets a turn at being good at something, Harry said to her one of those evenings, working it out aloud. Hermione kept adding up. Everyone's good at something, she said. Most people just never get put where the something is. It's not complicated. People act like it's complicated. She underlined a total. Ginny's going to be better than all of us. She watches. Nobody watches her watching because she's the youngest and she's a girl, so they think she's not doing anything. She's doing everything. She's just doing it with her eyes. She closed the notebook. Don't tell her I said so. She'd be insufferable. Harry did not tell Ginny, but he watched her watching after that, and Hermione was right, which by the age of 8 he had already stopped finding surprising. There was a fortnight every summer that broke the year in two, and Harry hated it the way you hate a tooth being pulled, knowing it must be done and dreading it all the same. He went to his aunt's. He had always gone. It had been settled before he could remember, part of the arrangement that had brought him to the Burrow, though no one would explain to him as a small child exactly why, only that it kept him safe, and that the great wizard with the kind eyes and the cold ones underneath had asked it, and that it was not up for discussion. Number 4 Privet Drive, 2 weeks every August. His mother's sister, who had Lily's eyes nowhere in her long pale face and never once mentioned that Harry had them. The Dursleys were not cruel exactly. Harry, who had grown up in a house where cruelty would have stood out like a curse mark, had a fine instrument for measuring it, and he gave them their due. They did not strike him, they did not starve him, they fed him from the same table they fed their son, though never quite as much. What they did was simpler and colder than cruelty. They behaved for 2 weeks every year like he was not entirely there. They spoke over him. They flinched from the word magic as from a bad smell and forbade its mention, which Harry could have borne, except that they forbade, along with it, any mention of the people he loved, so that for 14 days he was not allowed to say the names Mum or Dad or Hermione or Ron, was not allowed to be out loud, the person he was the other 351 days of the year. His cousin Dudley was large and bored and had been taught, the way you teach a dog, that Harry was a safe thing to be unpleasant to. Harry, who had grown up wrestling the twins, was not frightened of Dudley, which confused Dudley, who was used to smaller and softer cousins. But there was no one to wrestle with for fun, and no one to read to him in the drafty dark, and no clock on the wall that knew his name, and the bedroom they gave him, a real bedroom, Dudley's spare, was the loneliest room he had ever slept in, precisely because there was nothing wrong with it at all. He wrote letters. That was how he got through. Arthur had given him a school owl on loan, sworn to secrecy from Petunia, who would have had a fit, and Harry kept it in the garden shed at Privet Drive and fed it bacon smuggled from breakfast, and every night he wrote home, and every night the owl carried it to Ottery St. Catchpole, and every morning it came back. Molly wrote about the garden and what the chickens had done and how Percy had got a prefect's badge and worn it to bed. Arthur wrote about a stapler he had acquired. Ron wrote 3 lines, badly spelled, usually about food. And Hermione wrote pages, long crossed pages in her small fierce hand, about the books she was reading and the things she had discovered, and exactly in order, the things that had happened each day so that he would not feel he had missed them. And at the bottom of every single letter, the same 2 words, no flourish, no explanation, come home. On the last morning of the fortnight, the year he was 8, Petunia stood in the hall while he waited for Arthur to come and collect him, and she watched him with his small case packed, and she said, suddenly, in a voice he had never heard her use, "You've got her eyes. My sister's. You've had them this whole time." And then the doorbell rang, and her face closed like a window, and she never finished it, and Harry never found out what she had been going to say, and carried the not knowing of it home with him along with everything else. The clock told them he was coming before the door did. Harry learned this years later from Ginny, who told it like a legend, which to her it was. How the whole fortnight his hand sat at traveling, off among the others, and how Molly could not pass the clock without looking at it, and how on the day he was due the entire family found reasons to be in the kitchen, and how when his hand finally swung home, swept round past school and work and came to rest at home with a small definite click that the clock made for no other reason, the whole lot of them cheered like Gryffindor had won the cup, and Hermione got to the door first. She always got to the door first. She had a sense for it, Ginny said. She could feel the click coming. That year, when Arthur brought him over the stile with his small, sad case, Hermione was already at the gate, and she did not say welcome back, and she did not say I missed you, both of which would have been true and neither of which was what was needed. She took the case out of his hand, and she looked at his face, reading it the way Molly read Arthur's, and she said, right. The pond's warm. Ron caught a newt and named it after Percy. There's a new history of magic I've saved the good chapter of to read with you, and Mum's doing the treacle tart because you're home. In that order, come on. And she took his hand, the lonely fortnight already draining out of him like water out of a cracked bucket, and pulled him up the lane toward the noise and the warmth and the smell of treacle, toward home, and Harry let himself be pulled and was. The twins ran the house the way weather runs a country, which is to say constantly, invisibly, and with occasional spectacular disasters that everyone agreed afterward could not have been predicted, and everyone had in fact predicted. They were 11 and then 12 across those years, away at Hogwarts most of it, which meant that the holidays arrived like a tide of gunpowder. Fred and George Weasley did not prank to be cruel. Harry worked this out early, and it was the key to surviving them. They pranked the way other people breathed to feel alive, and the unbreakable law of it, the thing that separated them from bullies, was that they only ever aimed at people who could take it, and they took it back in full when it came, and they never, not once, in all the years Harry knew them, made a joke at the expense of anyone who was already down. Harry learned this the summer they turned the entire family's hair, one by one, a violent Chudley Cannon's orange, by means of a doctored shampoo, and timed it so that the color bloomed not in the bath but precisely at breakfast, one head at a time, around the table, like candles being lit. Percy went orange over his porridge and shrieked. Charlie went orange and laughed so hard he fell off the bench. Molly went orange, and the twins, who had not dared and had absolutely dared, went the color of the snow, until she turned slowly with the wooden spoon and said, "You've forgotten something," and they said in unison, terrified, "What?" And she reached up and felt her own orange hair and said, "I think it suits me, actually. Eat your breakfast," and the relief in the kitchen was so total that even Percy laughed in the end, orange and furious and laughing. But the part Harry kept was this. He had gone orange too, of course. They pranked him exactly as much as they pranked their blood, which was the highest honor they knew how to give and the surest sign that he was theirs. And a week later in the village, when the family went in for the shopping, old Mrs. Pinch in the post office looked at Harry's hair, which was still faintly tangerine at the roots, and then looked at his face, and got the particular look that grown-ups in the village sometimes got, the one that meant they had remembered who he was, the Potter boy, the famous one, the orphan they'd taken in, poor mite, fancy, and she leaned over the counter and said, in the sugary voice people used for tragedies, "And how are you getting on, dear, all on your own among all these," and did not finish, and meant all these who aren't really yours. Harry had heard it before. It did not hurt the way it once had, but before he could answer, the twins were there, one at each shoulder, materializing the way they did. "He's not on his own," said Fred. "He's got us," said George. "There's loads of us," said Fred. "That's rather the problem," said George, "from a shampoo standpoint." And Ron appeared at Harry's other side, having abandoned the sweets entirely, which from Ron was a declaration of war, and said loudly to Mrs. Pinch, "He's my brother," in a voice that dared her to say otherwise, and Ginny took Harry's hand on the other side and glared up at the old woman with such concentrated 9-year-old menace that Mrs. Pinch actually drew back, and Hermione last stepped in front of all of them and said, in her most devastating, polite voice, the one that had reduced a ministry clerk to apologizing for the weather, "We'll take the stamps now, please, and a quarter of the lemon sherbets, and you needn't worry about Harry. He's the least alone person I've ever met. Thank you so much." And she paid, and she shepherded them all out, and on the green outside Harry stood in the middle of his orange-rooted, fiercely arranged family and felt the village fall away behind him like a thing that could not touch him. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yeah, we did," said Ron in the tone of someone whose brother had said something stupid, which in Ron's view he had. "She was being weird at you. People are weird at you. We've talked about it." He went red. "Not like behind your back, we just, the first time someone's weird at you, we always feel like thumping them, and Mum says we can't thump people in the village, so we do the talking instead. There's a system." He scuffed the grass. "Any way you do it for us." "I would," said Harry, and meant it down to the soles of his feet. "Plus," said George, "you're the only one of us who can catch the snitch. And we're not losing our seeker to a sad old bat in a post office," said Fred. "We've got crates to win. Priorities, Harry." That night the twins put a fanged frisbee in Percy's bed, and Percy threatened to write to the ministry, and the house roared on the way it always roared, and Harry lay in his bed listening to it through the floor, the immense ordinary uproar of his family, and thought that there were a great many ways to be rich, and that the village would never understand the one he had. The shadow came into the house the autumn Harry was 9, and it came, of all the doors it might have used, through Arthur's work, which had always before been the safest and silliest thing about him. Arthur worked in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office, which was a small office and a quiet one, and his job was mostly to find biting kettles and shrinking door keys and the occasional flying motorcar before the Muggles noticed, and to undo the charm and have a stern word. He loved it. He came home with stories that made the children weep with laughter, about a man who had bewitched his lawnmower to do the neighbors' gardens too and bankrupted himself buying petrol, about a set of false teeth that had taken to commenting on what their owner ate. It was the gentlest work in the ministry, and Arthur was the gentlest man in it, and that was exactly why the change in him, when it came, frightened Harry more than shouting would have. He started coming home tired in a way the office had never tired him before. He stopped telling the funny stories at the table, or told them with half his attention, his eyes going to the window. And one night in October, after the children were supposed to be down, Harry, going for a glass of water, heard his parents talking in the kitchen in the low voices that meant the thing was real, and he stopped on the third stair, the one that groaned, with his foot held just above it, and listened. "It's the 4th this month," Arthur was saying. "4th dark object come up through confiscations and landed on my desk because nobody knows whose desk it ought to land on. They're not Muggle artifacts, Molly, that's the trouble. They're old and they're nasty and someone's been keeping them and someone stopped, all at once, all over the country, and the why of it is what I can't." A chair scraped. Mundungus had a curse box he swore he didn't know was a curse box. There was a thing came in from an estate sale in Yorkshire that 2 trained curse breakers wouldn't touch, and today, Molly, today there was I don't even know what it was. A locket, I think, under all though it had been melted and recast to hide what it was, and when I held the box it was in, the lead box sealed, I felt it, in my teeth, like a wrong note, like something in there was awake and didn't like being looked at. "You brought it home," said Molly. It was not a question. Harry had not known either until that moment, and the knowing of it ran down his back like cold water. "I had to log it overnight. There was nowhere secure at the office. The vaults are full. It's in the shed in 3 boxes, and a binding charm Bill taught me, and I'll have it gone by morning. I swear to you, I'd never with the children, I'd never if there were any other." Arthur's voice cracked, and Harry had never heard it crack, not once in 9 years. "Molly, I think something's coming back. I don't know how to say it so it doesn't sound mad. The objects, the way they've all surfaced at once, it's like, you know how the tide goes out a long way before a big wave. It's like the world's tide going out. And Albus has been asking questions, quiet ones, the kind he asks when he already knows the answer and is checking your face, and he asked me last week, out of nowhere, whether Harry had ever spoken of his dreams." There was a silence in the kitchen. Harry stood on the stair above it with his glass forgotten in his hand. "His dreams," said Molly, "his dreams," and I said no because it's true, he never has he? And Albus looked at me a moment too long and said, "Good, let me know if that changes. Let me know if that changes, Molly," as if he's waiting for it to. Harry went back up to bed without his water. He lay in the dark a long time, and somewhere in the small hours, for the first time he could afterward be sure of, his scar woke. It did not hurt, not yet, not that first time. It prickled. It was the feeling of a limb that has been still too long beginning to come back, a fizzing along the thin old line of it, and with the prickling came a thing that was almost a dream and almost not. A darkness and a cold, and far off in the cold a sound that might have been a voice or might have been wind through a keyhole, saying nothing, only there, only awake, only aware, in the way the box in the shed was aware of being looked at. And Harry, 9 years old, lay rigid in his bed and understood with the whole certainty of his body that the thing in the shed and the thing under his scar knew each other, where in some way he had no words for the same kind of thing, 2 notes of the same wrong chord. He did not go and wake his parents. He thought about it. But Arthur had sworn the box would be gone by morning, and Harry did not want to be the reason his father knew the thing had reached as far as the house after all. So he did the other thing. He got up and he crossed the landing and he tapped on the wall twice. After a moment 2 taps came back. He went out to the reading nook, and she came in the otter jumper gone thin at the elbows, with her hair a great dark cloud and her eyes sharp with sleep and instantly sharper without it, and she took one look at him and said, "What's wrong? You've gone the color of the wall," and he told her. All of it. The kitchen, the boxes in the shed, the locket like a wrong note, Albus asking about dreams, and then the scar and the cold and the thing far off that had felt him feeling it. Hermione listened the way she listened to everything completely without once interrupting, which from Hermione was the rarest gift there was. And when he had finished, she did not tell him it was a bad dream, which is what an adult would have done and what he could not have borne. She sat with it. She turned it over. And then she said the thing that made her, then and ever after, the person he ran to first. "All right," she said. "So it's real. We'll start from it being real because you felt it and you don't make things up. You're the least made-up person I know. So, something in the shed is the same kind of thing as the something in your scar, and Dumbledore is waiting for your dreams to start, which means Dumbledore knows there's a connection and hasn't told anyone, which means..." She stopped. Her eyes had gone far away, doing the thing they did, which means the connection was always going to be there, whatever happened to you. He's not surprised it's starting, he's just been waiting. Harry, that means it isn't about the box at all. The box just woke it up early. It was always going to wake. She looked at him, 9 years old, in the dark, and did not flinch from the size of it. "There's a piece of something bad in your head, has been since you were a baby. And the most powerful wizard alive knows and is keeping it to himself and watching you to see what it does. That's the worst version, said Harry. It's the version that fits all the facts, said Hermione. I don't do comforting versions. You don't want comforting versions. You want the true one so you can do something about it. She took his hand in the dark, the way she had at the gate the day he came home from Privet Drive. And here's the part that's also true and also fits the facts. Whatever it is, it's been in there 9 years and you're still you. You're still the kindest person in this house and the bravest, and you stood in a ring of ice once and weren't scared of me. A piece of something bad has had 9 years to make you bad, and it hasn't, because it's a piece and you're a whole person, and a whole person is bigger than a piece. So we watch it and we learn about it, and when the time comes we get it out, together. I'm extremely good at learning about things. You are, said Harry, and found to his own surprise that he could breathe again. In the morning the boxes were gone from the shed. Arthur had taken them at first light, gray-faced, and would not speak of it, and the funny stories did not come back for a long while. But the scar had gone quiet, and Harry had Hermione, and a thing shared with Hermione was a thing already half solved, and he carried the new knowledge of himself the way he carried the box of his parents inside him, carefully, without dropping it, and without letting it drop him. Arthur's shed was the other country inside the country of the Burrow, and on the wet Saturdays of that long childhood, it was where Harry and Hermione most liked to disappear. It smelled of oil and old wood, in the particular dustless dust of things kept because they were loved. The shelves held Arthur's hoard, plugs of every size, sorted by a system only he understood, a row of batteries he spoke of the way other men spoke of vintages, a telephone he had never got to ring and had not given up on, a torch, a toaster, a thing Hermione identified as a carburetor and Arthur as a miracle. Pottered there on the days the rain kept the orchard empty, and he never once told the two of them to go away, and that Harry understood without being told was itself a kind of love, the open door of it. Now this, Arthur said, on a Saturday the spring the dark first came, holding up a small flat square of plastic. This I cannot fathom. Hermione, help an old man. What does it do? Hermione took it and turned it over with the reverence the shed required. It's a floppy disk, she said. It's how Muggles keep, well, information. Numbers, words, pictures. You put it in a computer and the computer reads it. There's a whole library in there in a way. It's all just very small patterns, ones and nothings. Arthur held the little square as though she had told him it contained the sea. A library, he breathed, in ones and nothings, without a single spell. Hermione, do you understand what your people have done? We hide our magic from them and pat ourselves on the back for it, and all the while they've gone and built a way to keep a library in a thing the size of a biscuit, out of nothing but cleverness and stubbornness, because no one ever told them they couldn't. He set it on the shelf in pride of place. That's the bravest magic there is, the kind you make up yourself because you don't know it's impossible. Your mum and dad had it, the Muggle kind, the making-do kind. He said it gently into the rain sound, not looking at her, giving her the gift sideways the way the shed required. You've got it too, I've watched you. You take a thing apart to see how it works, and you're not afraid of it, ever, and there's no spell on this earth as strong as a person who isn't afraid to understand. Hermione did not say anything. She picked up a screwdriver and began very carefully to take apart the torch, so that she would have something to do with her hands, and Arthur let her, and showed her where the spring went, and Harry sat on the upturned crate that was his by long custom and watched his father and his sister bent over a Muggle torch in the lamplight while the rain came down, and felt the shadow that had come into the house the week before grow, for an hour, very small and far away. Dad, Harry said when the torch was in 40 pieces, if something bad's coming, why are we doing this? Why aren't we, I don't know, practicing, getting ready? Arthur was quiet a moment. He fitted the little spring back into Hermione's palm. Because this is getting ready, he said. People think you get ready for the dark by learning to fight it, and you do some. Bill could teach you that when you're older. But the thing the dark wants, Harry, the thing it's actually after, is for you to forget that any of this was ever worth it. A torch in pieces, a library and a biscuit, your sister's face when she works a thing out. The dark wins the day you stop thinking these are worth defending and start thinking only the fighting's real. He handed Harry the torch casing. So we keep the small things, we keep them on purpose. That's not us failing to get ready. That's us knowing exactly what we're getting ready for. He smiled. Now hold that steady. We're going to make this Muggle torch light up without a single battery and never tell Hermione how, and it'll drive her mad for a week. It did. It drove her mad for 9 days. It was, Harry thought afterward, one of the best weeks of his life. Harry's 10th birthday fell on a Tuesday, and Molly made it a Sunday by sheer decree, because a birthday on a working day was, she said, an insult to the birthday, and so the whole family was home, even Bill, who was apprenticed to Gringotts now and home so rarely that his clock hand spent most of its life at work, or alarmingly, at traveling, often places the family did not ask about. There were 10 at the table and one too many chairs, because there was always one too many chairs, Molly's rule, a place kept for whoever might come. There was a cake the size of a cartwheel with 10 candles and a leaping stag iced on top in green, Lily's green, Molly's small yearly way of putting the people in the box at the table too. Were presents a proper broom servicing kit from Charlie, with a wink that meant he had not given up the campaign about Harry's flying, a book of jokes from the twins that turned out 3 pages in to scream, a set of self-shuffling exploding snap cards from Ron that Ron clearly wanted to keep and gave anyway, which Harry understood and loved him for, a knitted hat from Molly and a Muggle plug from Arthur given entirely in earnest that Harry kept on his shelf for the rest of his life. And from Hermione a book she had made herself, pages sewn down the spine, in which she had written out in her small, fierce hand every single thing that had happened at the Burrow in the year he had been 9, the games and the gnomes and the newt named after Percy, so that she said, going pink, he would have it, all of it, in case he ever went anywhere lonely again and needed to remember he had somewhere that wasn't. There was one more parcel that came by an owl none of them knew, a great handsome eagle owl that would not stay for bacon, and it was addressed to Mr. H. Potter in a slanting, elegant hand that Arthur went still at the sight of. Inside was a book. It was beautiful, old, bound in dark blue leather, and the title, stamped in gold, was Champions of the Light, Wizards Who Stood Alone. There was a card. The card said in the slanting hand, Harry, 10 years old, I am told, and growing into yourself. There will come a time when you wish to know what others like you have faced and how they bore it. Knowledge is the truest courage, with my fond regard and my eye always upon your welfare. The table had gone quiet, even the twins. Molly took the card and read it, and her mouth went into a thin line. It's a lovely book, said Arthur carefully. Beautiful book, Hermione agreed, and she said it in a voice Harry knew, the flat, overpolite voice she had arrived with and almost never used now, the voice that meant she was thinking 3 things and saying 1. She took the book and turned it over and looked at the spine and opened it to the contents, and Harry watched her eyes go down the list of chapters and come back up changed. Later, in the reading nook, she laid it open across both their knees. Look at them, she said, the chapters, read me the people. Harry read Merlin, some witch in the 1400s who held a castle on her own, a wizard who dueled 100 dark wizards to save a village, Godric Gryffindor, a man who walked into it doesn't say what alone to, he slowed. They all do it alone, every single one, that's what the chapters are, wizards who stood alone. Wizards who stood alone, said Hermione, and won, and were loved for it after, when it was too late to do them any good, because most of them died doing it. It's a beautiful book about how the most wonderful thing a person can do is be brave all by themselves with nobody to help them and then die. She closed it gently, the way you close a thing you have decided not to trust. Who gives a 10-year-old that book, Harry? Who looks at a little boy with a whole family round him and a sister who'd walk into fire for him and sends him a present that says, the great ones do it alone? Harry looked at the blue leather and the gold letters and felt the cold come into the warm room. Someone who needs me to, he said slowly, for some reason, to be the kind who does it alone. Yes, Hermione's chin came up. Well, he can need it all he likes. She set the book on the high shelf, spine in, where it would gather dust for years, a thing kept but not read, the way the champions of the light themselves had been kept and not loved. You're not going to stand alone, Harry Potter. Not ever, not once, not if I'm anywhere on the same island. He can write you all the lovely books he wants. He's got the story wrong. You're not the one who stands alone. You never were. The whole reason you're still you is that you've never once had to. Harry looked at her in the lamplight, the girl who had come to the door shaking and now sat squared against the most powerful wizard alive on his behalf. And he thought a thing he did not have the words for at 10 and would have them for much later. That whatever Albus Dumbledore was building, he had made one error in the foundation of it years ago on a doorstep in Surrey and at a garden gate in Devon, and the error was this house, and the error was her. The whispers, when they finally reached the children plainly, came on the night of the storm. It was the following spring, the spring before the letters, and a great wind came up off the marsh and took half the orchard's blossom and rattled the crooked house until the timbers sang, and under cover of it 2 visitors came to the Burrow after dark. Harry knew one of them. It was Bill, home unexpectedly, white about the mouth. The other Harry had never seen, a wizard with a chunk gone out of his nose and an eye that did not match the other, who came in out of the rain and put his back to the wall and kept it there, and whom Arthur called Alistair in a low, respectful voice, and whom Molly fed without once being thanked and did not seem to mind. The children were sent up. They went up. They did not all of them stay up. Harry and Hermione and Ron lay along the landing above the kitchen with their ears to the gap where the boards had shrunk, and Ginny, who had a sense for these things, was already there when they arrived and made room without a word. They did not understand all of it. They were children, and the talk was grown and guarded, but they understood the shape. They understood that the man with the eye believed that the one who had killed Harry's parents was not gone, only unbodied, only waiting, somewhere far off, growing slowly back toward the world. They understood that the dark objects Arthur had been finding were pieces of something, that Dumbledore was hunting those pieces in secret, and that he believed there was one more piece he had not yet found and would not say where he thought it was. They understood that the man with the eye said twice the words the boy, and that each time he said it Bill made a sound, and Molly said, sharp, not under this roof you don't, not him, and the talk moved on. And they understood, lying along the cold boards in the stormlight, Ron's freckled face gone serious, Ginny's small hand finding Harry's sleeve, Hermione's breath steady beside him in the dark, that the warm, enormous, safe world of the Burrow had a wall around it after all, and that beyond the wall something was coming back, and that it had a particular interest. The man with the eye had said so in The Boy Who Lived. Harry lay still and let it settle into him. He was not the child who had heard the kitchen talk a year and a half before, the one who had gone cold on the stair. He had had 18 months to grow around the knowing, and what he felt lying there was not the fear the man with the eye plainly wanted them all to feel. It was something steadier and stranger. He had a family that would put its back to the wall like the scarred old wizard had. He had a mother who would say not him, not under this roof, to anyone, even to the dark. He had a sister breathing in the dark beside him who had already promised him in this exact spot that he would never stand alone, and who did not make promises she had not first checked against the facts. Whatever was coming, it would have to come through all of that first. "We should go down," Ron whispered. "Tell them we heard. It's not fair, them carrying it and us not." "Not yet," Hermione whispered back. "If they know we know, they'll start being careful around us, and then we'll learn nothing, and we need to learn everything. We carry it quiet like they do. We watch." Her hand found Harry's other sleeve, so that he lay there in the dark, held on both sides, Ginny gripping one arm and Hermione the other, Ron's shoulder warm against his back. "All of us together, we start now." "Together," Ron breathed. "Together," said Ginny, fierce, 8 years old and already in it to the end. Below them the storm threw itself at the house, and the house held, the way it always held, on love and very little mortar. And on the kitchen wall the great clock kept its hands at home. 11 of them, the stag and the otter side by side among the rest, while in the kitchen the grown-ups carried the dark between them and did not know yet that they no longer carried it alone, that a new watch had quietly set itself that night along a cold landing floor, 4 children and a promise, keeping the wall. Harry fell asleep there in the end, on the boards, with the storm and his family all around him, and did not dream. And in the morning Molly found the 4 of them in a heap on the landing and carried them, one by one, complaining and half-waking, back to their beds, and said nothing, and looked for a long moment before she went down at the gap in the boards above the kitchen, and the line of her mouth, had any of them been awake to see it, was not angry at all. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Letters by Owlite. The letters came on the same morning, which the family agreed afterward was the clock's doing, or the school's, or simply the universe declining for once to separate 2 people who had never asked to be separated. 2 owls, one each, down through the kitchen window and into the porridge steam, and they landed in front of Harry and Hermione side by side, and the envelopes were the heavy yellowish kind with the green ink and the crest, and the whole table stopped. Even the twins, who had had theirs 3 years before and pretended to be above it, lined in. Harry knew his handwriting. He had seen it on his own door for 11 years in the form of the address the trace office kept, but here it was made formal and grand. Mr. H. Potter, the 2nd bedroom, the Burrow, Ottery, St. Catchpole, Devon. They knew where he slept. They always did. That was Hogwarts. And beside him, Hermione, said Miss H. Granger, the small room beside the stairs, the Burrow. And at the sight of that, at the sight of the School of Magic, knowing exactly which small room was hers, which room had been the box room and the camp room and was now, indisputably, in green ink, hers, Hermione Granger put both hands flat on the table to keep them still and read her own name 3 times before she would open it. "Go on then," said Ron, who had his own clutched white-knuckled in front of him, identical, because Ron was 11 too, 3 weeks Harry's senior, and never once let him forget it. "Together, on 3. I'm not opening mine first, I'll be sick." They opened them on 3. Harry read the words he had been waiting his whole remembered life for. "We are pleased to inform you," and the kitchen erupted, and Molly was crying into her apron and pretending it was the onions, though there were no onions. And Arthur was shaking Harry's hand, and then Ron's, and then, getting carried away, the owls and Ginny, who would not go for another whole year and felt the unfairness of it in her bones, threw her arms around Hermione and burst into tears and laughter at once. And the twins began at top volume to list the rules of Hogwarts that were most worth breaking and in what order. In the noise, Harry looked across at Hermione. She had her letter held against her chest the way she had once held a children's edition of King Arthur on a cold doorstep, both arms as though it might be taken. But her chin was up and her eyes were bright and steady, and when she caught him looking she did the thing she did, the firm nod, the one that meant a thing decided. "We're going," she said just to him under the roar. "We're going," Harry agreed. Diagon Alley took a whole day and most of the family. They went on the last Saturday in August, the lot of them that were going and several that were not but were not about to miss it, by flew to the Leaky Cauldron, where the landlord recognized Harry the instant he stepped out of the grate, the way strangers always did, his eyes going to the scar and then wide and then to the rest of them. The loud red-haired tribe pouring out of the fireplace one after another with a Potter in the middle of them, and the whole pub turned and a hush ran round it. Harry had grown up under that hush. He had learned to walk through it the way you walk through cobwebs without letting it stick. He felt Hermione close on his left and Ron solid on his right, and Molly's hand come down warm on his shoulder, steering, and he kept his eyes ahead and his face easy, and Molly said, clear and pleasant to the whole staring pub, "Yes, all hours, no you can't have one, mind the bench," and swept them through to the yard, and the hush broke into laughter behind them, and that was Molly, who could disarm a room the way Bill could disarm a curse. Gringotts was Harry's, and he had dreaded it a little, and need not have. He had known, in the way you know a thing without weighing it, that his parents had left him money. Arthur had told him plainly years ago, the way they told him everything. "There's a vault, Harry, it's yours, your mum and dad saw to it, you'll have it when you're old enough to need it, and you'll need it for school." What Harry had not known was what it would do to him to stand in the cold stone vault, far underground, with the cart tracks ticking behind him, and see it. Not a fortune, the Potters had not been rich, but careful piles of gold and silver, and on the lid of a small box among them, in a hand he had only ever seen in one photograph, a label, "For Harry, for when he is grown, we love you, Mum and Dad." He did not open the box. He was not grown yet, that was the point of it. They had known they might not be there to say when, and had left the saying to him. He took what he needed for school, and he put the box back carefully where they had left it, and he stood a moment in the lamplight with his hand flat on the cold lid, and Hermione, who had insisted on coming down in the cart and being sick rather than let him go alone, stood beside him and did not say anything, which was the kindest thing anyone could have done, and put her hand on his shoulder the way Molly did, and they went back up together. In the cart, rattling up through the dark, Harry made a decision, and he made it the way he made the ones that mattered, all at once and completely. He had more than he needed. The family had, as the family always had, exactly enough and not a nut over. He had seen Molly's face at the apothecary's prices, the quick tightening she hid. He had seen Ron pretend not to want the new self-inking quills and choose the cheap ones. He had grown up in the warmth of people who gave him everything and would have been mortally insulted by charity, so he did not offer charity. He was cleverer than that. He had been raised by Arthur Weasley, who had taught him that the trick to a thing is usually sideways. He waited until Ron was distracted at the broomstick window, and he bought quietly the proper self-inking quills, a set, and at the till he asked the man to wrap them as from the twins, and then he found Fred and George and pressed the coins into their hands and said, "It's from all three of us, you put your names on it too. He'll only take it if it's a joke present from his brothers, he won't take it from me." And the twins looked at him, and for once did not make a joke, and Fred said, "You're all right, Potter," which from Fred was a sonnet, and they did it, and Ron got his quills from his brothers and never knew, and used them for 7 years. For Hermione there was no sideways needed, because Hermione would take a book from him the way she took air without counting it, the one extravagance she never weighed. He bought her at Flourish and Blots while she was lost 3 aisles deep in the second-hand stacks with her arms already full, a thing she had touched twice and put back twice because it cost too much. Hogwarts, a history, the full edition, the heavy one, brand new. He had it sent. It arrived at the Burrow the day before they left, and she read it cover to cover that night, and quoted it at him for the next 7 years, and he never once minded, not once, because every time she said it says in Hogwarts, a history, he heard underneath, the sound of having got someone exactly the right thing. Ollivanders was last, and Ollivanders was where the day changed. Shop was narrow and dim and smelled of dust and secrets, and the old man came out of the shadows the way spiders come out, all at once and from an unexpected direction, and his pale eyes went first, as everyone's did, to the scar. "I wondered," said Mr. Ollivander softly, "when I would see you, Mr. Potter. You have your mother's eyes. It seems only yesterday she was in here herself, 10¼ inches, swishy willow, a fine wand for charm work, and your father favored mahogany. 11 inches, pliable, a little more power and excellent for transfiguration. Well, I say your father favored it. It is truer to say the wand favored him. The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter, never forget it." He did Hermione first, at Harry's quiet asking, because Harry had seen her go still in the doorway and known she was bracing again, bracing to be the Muggle-born who would not understand, who would do it wrong, who would be found out. She was not found out. The third wand he gave her, vine wood and dragon heartstring, 10¾ inches, sent a warmth up her arm and a shower of gold sparks across the dust, and Ollivander said, "Oh, very good. Yes, a demanding wand, that one. It goes to those who are meant for more than ordinary. It does not suit the timid or the small of soul. It has been waiting, I think, for someone worth the trouble," and Hermione, who had spent 4 years half believing she was an accident the magical world had failed to send back, stood holding a wand that had chosen her for being too much rather than not enough, and did not speak, and did not need to. Then it was Harry, and it took a long time, and the pile of tried-and-rejected wands grew on the counter, and Ollivander grew, not frustrated but delighted, murmuring, "Tricky customer, tricky," until he went very still and went into the back and came out with a dusty box he held differently from the others. "I wonder," he said, "holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. Go on, give it a wave." The instant it was in his hand Harry felt it, a warmth, a rightness, a sense of a thing fitting that he had felt only one other place in the world, which was the gate of the Burrow when he came home from Privet Drive. and red and gold sparks streamed from the end of it like the tail of a comet, and Hermione made a small glad sound, and Ron whooped, and Mr. Ollivander cried, "Oh, bravo." "Yes, indeed, oh, very good," and then slowly he stopped, and the delight drained out of his face and something older came into it. "Curious," he said softly. "Curious, curious." "Sorry," said Harry, "what's curious?" The pale eyes fixed on him. "I remember every wand I have ever sold, Mr. Potter, every one, and it happens that the phoenix whose tail feather sits in your wand gave another feather, just one other. It is very curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother, why, its brother gave you that scar." The shop went quiet. Harry felt Hermione's hand close on his sleeve, and he was glad of it because the cold had come into the warm, dim shop the way it had come into the kitchen on the night of the boxes, the way it came whenever the thing under his scar was named without being named. "We can expect great things from you, Mr. Potter," Ollivander went on, soft and dreaming. After all, he who must not be named did great things. Terrible, yes, but great. And Harry, 11 years old, holding a wand that was brother to the one that had killed his parents, looked the old man in his pale eyes and said, in a voice that was steadier than any of them expected, the thing his whole childhood had built in him without his knowing it was being built. "He did them alone, though, didn't he? Whatever he did it all on his own." Ollivander blinked. "I'm not going to be alone," said Harry. He looked at Hermione's hand on his sleeve, and at Ron behind him, and out the dusty window at the bright alley where his mother and father had once chosen their own wands, and where his enormous family waited. "So I expect we'll do different things. Thanks for the wand, it's brilliant." He paid, and they went out into the sun, and Hermione walked very close to him all the way back to the leaky cauldron and did not let go of his sleeve. And neither of them said out loud the thing Ollivander had told them, but both of them put it carefully into the place where they kept the things they were going to have to deal with later together, where it sat beside the locket like a wrong note in the book about wizards who stood alone, growing, waiting. The shape of the thing that was coming slowly filling itself in. They had ice cream after at Florian Fortescue's, because Arthur declared that no first trip to Diagon Alley was complete without it, and Molly declared that they could not afford it, and Arthur won, which he did about twice a year, and always on things that mattered more than money. It was there, with chocolate and raspberry melting down 7 cones, that a shadow fell over the little table the size of a small house, and a voice Harry had heard only in the stories of his own babyhood said, "Well, if it ain't the whole blessed lot of ye," and Harry looked up, and up into the beaming, beetle-eyed, enormous face of the man who had carried him to the Burrow 11 years before and wept the whole way. "Hagrid," said Molly, and was on her feet at once. "Rubeus Hagrid, as I live and breathe." Hagrid had to be introduced all over again because the children had been too small to remember or not yet born, and he shook each hand with a finger, and when he got to Harry he stopped, and his great face worked, and his eyes went bright as black beetles in rain. "Last time I saw ye," Hagrid said thickly, "ye were this big. This big, Harry, I could hold ye in one hand, and I did, all the way from the wreck of that poor house to your mum's gate here." He nodded at Molly, who had become, in the telling, the mother which she was, "and I cried so hard I couldn't see the road. And look at ye now, off ter Hogwarts. Ye have got," he peered, "ye have got Lily's eyes, ye always did. And ye look happy, Harry, ye look like a happy lad." That's, he blew his nose like a foghorn on a tablecloth-sized handkerchief that Harry recognized with a jolt as quite possibly the very one from the kitchen floor. "That's all I ever wanted ter see. Knew it, knew they'd do right by ye." He beamed wetly round at the Weasleys. "Best thing that man ever did letting ye come here, best thing." Harry stood up and hugged him, which took some doing and some climbing, and Hagrid went to pieces entirely and had to sit down on a chair that protested. He could not stay. He had business, he said, important business, Hogwarts business, very secret, and he tapped the side of his great nose and then, being Hagrid, told them roughly half of it anyway. A errand for Professor Dumbledore down at the bank, something being moved from a vault to the school where it'd be safe, not that he could say what, not that anyone could, and Harry felt Hermione go still beside him, taking it in, filing nothing away because Hermione did not file things away, she sharpened them and kept them where she could reach them. Something moved from a vault to the school to be kept safe. They looked at each other over the melting ice cream and said nothing, and added it together to the growing shape. Hagrid left them with a cone the size of a bucket bought for the whole table and an open invitation to his hut and the firm promise that Harry was to come and have tea the very first week, and lumbered off into the crowd, dabbing his eyes, and Harry watched him go and felt the warmth of being remembered by someone who had known him before he could remember himself, another thread back to the people in the box, another person who had loved him into the world. The 1st of September came too fast and not fast enough, which is the only speed it ever comes at. Molly got them to King's Cross in good time by getting them up at an hour Harry considered frankly hostile, and there was the usual catastrophe of Trunks and the owl, Hermione's new owl, a small, severe creature she had named Hypatia and who regarded the family with the same affront Hermione herself had once shown the noise. And there was Ginny, who came along and clung and was brave and then, at the last, not brave at all, gripping Harry round the middle on the platform with her face hidden. "It's only till Christmas," Harry told the top of her head. "We'll be back at Christmas, you'll see, and I write better than Ron. Ron'll just send you a list of what he's eaten." "It's not the same," said Ginny into his jumper, 8 years old and furious at time itself. "It's not the same here without you. There'll be a whole year of just me and the clock." Harry crouched down so they were level. He had been her age once, the youngest, the one left behind for a fortnight every summer, and he knew the particular size of a year when you are 8. "Watch the clock for me," he said. "All right, you're the best watcher in the family. Hermione says so. She said it years ago and made me promise not to tell you. So you keep the watch here. You make sure all our hands come back to home where they belong. And next year you'll be on the train too, and it'll be your hand the rest of us are watching for. Deal?" Ginny scrubbed her face with the back of her hand. "Deal," she said, "but you have to send a proper owl, not a list of food." "Not a list of food," Harry promised, and she let go. The barrier between platforms 9 and 10 swallowed them one at a time, and then there was the scarlet engine and the steam and the crush, and Molly was checking faces and necks and noses for dirt and finding it on Ron, who submitted with the air of a martyr, and Percy was striding about with his shiny prefect's badge held where the light caught it, and the twins were already gone into the crowd in search of a friend called Lay and a tarantula, and Arthur stood a little apart with his hands in his pockets. Watching his children get on a train with the particular still face of a man counting his blessings because the alternative is letting them spill, he drew Harry aside at the last. He did this every year before the Dursleys too, the quiet private word, and Harry had come to treasure it. "Now then," Arthur said, "you'll hear things this year about who you are. There'll be teachers who look at you twice and a school full of children who grew up on the story of you, and some of them will want to be your friend because of the scar and some will want to hate you for it, and both are about a Harry that isn't you, so you needn't take either too seriously." He straightened Harry's collar, an excuse to keep his hands busy. "And there's a man at that school, the headmaster, who—" He stopped. He was not a man who spoke ill of his betters, and Albus Dumbledore was, by every measure the world agreed on, his better. "Who is a very great wizard," Arthur went on carefully, "and a good one, I do believe that, and who carries the whole world on his back and has done for a long time, and a man like that can come to see people as parts of the load, as things to be carried to the right place, even when he loves them, especially when he loves them." He met Harry's eyes. "You're not a part of his load, Harry, you're my son. If anything ever feels like you're being moved about a board, you write home that same hour, do you hear me? You don't wait, you don't be brave about it. We come, that's the whole of it, whatever it is, we come." "I know you do," said Harry, and because they were Weasleys and not given to speeches, he hugged his father quickly and got on the train before either of them could go to pieces on a public platform. Found a compartment with Ron and Hermione, and the three of them claimed it, and the train pulled out, and the platform slid away with Molly waving and Ginny running alongside until the end of the platform ran out, and then they were gone out into England, toward Scotland, toward the rest of their lives. They had not been moving an hour when the door slid open on a round-faced boy with the look of someone who has already lost something important. "Sorry," he said miserably. "Has anyone seen a toad?" "I've lost my toad. Gran's going to kill me. He's called Trevor. He keeps—" "We haven't," said Hermione, already getting up, already rolling up her sleeves, because a problem had presented itself, and Hermione Granger could no more leave a problem alone than the tide could. "But I'll help you look. It's much easier with two. I'm Hermione Granger. This is Harry. This is Ron. Sit down a moment first. You look like you've been up and down the train 10 times. 11, said the boy. "I'm Neville." "Neville Longbottom." He said the name the way Hermione had once said her own on the doorstep, braced, as though it were a thing people had opinions about. "Longbottom," said Harry, who had grown up among the whispers of the old war and knew the name from the cold landing floor, knew it was a name spoken with the same hush as his own, two more parents lost to the same dark, and who therefore did the one thing nobody had ever done for Neville Longbottom in the hush, which was to treat it as ordinary. "Sit down, Neville, have a cauldron cake. Mum packs about 400. We'll find Trevor. Toads can't have got far, they're rubbish at it, that's sort of their whole problem." And Neville Longbottom, who had got on the train alone and braced, sat down among the loud warm Weasley sprawl of them and had a cauldron cake and was within 10 minutes laughing, and Harry watched it happen and recognized it, because it had happened to a girl on a doorstep once, the slow unlocking of someone who had not expected to be let in, and he glanced at Hermione and found her already looking at him, and they did not need to say it. They had been raised in a house that took people in. It turned out you could do it anywhere. The toad hunt was interrupted twice. The first time by a witch with a trolley which delayed everything by the necessary 20 minutes of buying half of it. The second time by the compartment door sliding open on a pale pointed boy flanked by two larger boys who stood the way furniture stands for menace. "They're saying all down the train," said the pale boy, "that Harry Potter's in this compartment, so it's you, is it?" "It's me," Harry agreed. The pale boy looked him over and then looked with a curl of the lip at Ron's second-hand robes and Hermione's frizz of hair and Neville's anxious face and the wreckage of sweet wrappers, and the curl deepened. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there. He held out a pale hand. Draco Malfoy. There was a silence. Ron had gone red. Harry looked at the offered hand, and then at the two boys standing like furniture, and then at the pale, clever, scornful face that had been taught, the way Dudley had been taught, that some people were safe to despise, and Harry felt something he recognized, the old village feeling, the hush, the and how are you getting on, dear, all on your own among all these. He had spent his whole life being told, by hushes and by books bound in blue leather, that the great ones rose above the common sort and stood alone. "I think I can tell the wrong sort for myself, thanks," said Harry. He did not take the hand, "and I've met the wrong sort. The wrong sort's the kind that walks into a stranger's compartment and looks at his friends' clothes before he looks at their faces." He let that sit. "These are the right sort. This is Ron Weasley, who's my brother. This is Hermione Granger, who's my sister, and who's going to be top of every class you're ever in, you'll see. This is Neville Longbottom, whose mum and dad were heroes, same as mine. And me, I was raised by the best family in Britain who haven't got two galleons to rub together and are worth more than your whole vault, so." He shrugged, 11 years old, entirely certain. "You can shut the door on your way out. Mind the toad if you see him. He's called Trevor. He's worth more than you and all." Draco Malfoy's pale face went blotchy. He opened his mouth and shut it. One of the furniture boys cracked his knuckles, and Ron and Harry both stood up at once, shoulder to shoulder, two boys who had wrestled the twins their whole lives and were not in the least afraid of furniture. And Hermione said, in her most pleasant and most dangerous voice, "I really wouldn't. I've read 3 books on hexes and I've been dying to try one." And the Malfoy boy, who had expected awe and found a wall, retreated, and the door slammed, and the 4 of them sat back down in the warm wreckage and looked at each other and all at once fell about laughing. "Top of every class," said Hermione, pink with it. "You can't just say that." "You will be, though," said Harry. "That's not the point, you can't just—" But she was pleased, he could tell, the way he could always tell, and she did not finish. And outside the window the south of England gave way to the north, and the 4 of them played exploding snap with the cards Ron had nearly kept and given anyway, and found Trevor, eventually, asleep in the lining of Neville's own hat. And Harry thought that if this was Hogwarts, the start of it, then it was only the Burrow made larger, and he was not afraid of it at all. The castle came up out of the dark across the Black Lake like something out of Hermione's books, every window lit, and the first years crossed the water in little boats under a sky thick with stars. And even Hermione stopped reciting facts and simply looked, which Harry counted as the 8th wonder of the world. They were brought up cold stone steps and through doors that could have admitted a giant, several giants, the giant who had once wept on the Burrow's kitchen floor, and made to wait in a side chamber while a stern witch in green explained about the houses. And then they were led into the great hall, under the ceiling that was the sky, 10,000 candles floating, 4 long tables roaring with the school, and at the front a stool and a hat, an ancient patched pointed hat that to general astonishment opened a rip near its brim and sang. Harry did not hear the song. He was looking at the high table at the row of teachers, and his eyes were moving along them the way Arthur had taught him to read a room, and they snagged halfway along on a man in a purple turban talking to a sallow hook-nosed teacher in black. And the instant his eyes touched the turban his scar gave a hot quick stab, the first real pain it had ever given him, gone almost before it came, and he flinched, and Hermione's hand was on his arm at once. "Scar," she breathed, just then, just for a second. The high table, he kept his eyes down now. Don't look all at once, purple turban and the one in black next to him. Hermione looked the way she looked at everything without seeming to. "Noted," she murmured, and that was all, and Harry felt the weight of the moment have simply by being shared, the way it always did, the way it had since a cold landing when they were 6. The sorting began. McGonagall called the names and the children went up one by one and the hat decided, sometimes the moment it touched their hair, sometimes after a long murmuring while. Granger, Hermione. She went up with her chin level and sat, and the hat came down over her cloud of hair, and Harry watched her face and could read nothing on it, and the murmuring went on a long time, longer than most, the longest yet. And afterward she told him the whole of it, because they told each other the whole of everything. "A keen mind," the hat had said in her ear. "Oh, a very keen mind, the keenest I've had through in years. You'd do well in Ravenclaw, you know, they'd treasure you. You'd never want for a book or a clever word again, and you'd never have to fight to be understood, not for a single day." And the hat had felt her consider it, the offer of an easy place among her own kind, the relief of it, after 4 years of being too much. And then it had felt her set it gently down, the way she set down things she had decided not to trust, and she had thought, clear as speech, he'll be in Gryffindor. He's brave, he doesn't even know how brave, and brave people do stupid things, and somebody has to be there who's read the book. Put me where he is. And the hat had chuckled deep in its old seams and said, "Loyalty like that is its own kind of courage, my dear, the rarest kind, the kind that chooses," and had called out to the whole hall, "Gryffindor." She came to the cheering table glowing and squeezed in beside Percy, who shook her hand with enormous prefectly dignity, and the twins who reached across to muss her hair and were slapped away. Longbottom, Neville. Went to Gryffindor too after a long wait of his own, and arrived so relieved he forgot to take the hat off and had to run back with it. Malfoy Draco had barely touched his sleek head before the hat bellowed Slytherin, and the pale boy swaggered off to the table at the far side and did not look at Harry, and Harry did not look at him. Potter, Harry. The hall, which had been a wall of sound, dropped to a hiss of whispers. Potter, did she say Potter? The Harry Potter, and the necks craned, and Harry walked up through it the way he walked through the hush at the Leaky. The way Molly had taught him without ever teaching him, eyes ahead, face easy, and he sat on the stool and the hat came down over his eyes, blocking out the staring hall, leaving only the dark and the small voice. Well, well, said the hat, difficult, very difficult, plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind either. There's talent, oh yes, and a thirst to prove yourself, and a nerve, my word. So where to put you? Harry sat in the dark and waited, the way Arthur had taught him to wait, all the way to the bottom of a thing before you spoke. You could be great, you know, the hat murmured, and the murmur had a coaxing edge to it, the edge of the eagle owl in the blue leather book, the edge of every voice that had ever tried to tell Harry Potter that his destiny was a lonely and a special one. It's all here in your head, and Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness, no doubt about that. Greatness, Harry, the kind they write books about, the kind that stands alone above the common run and is remembered. You want to be more than the boy in the crooked house, don't you? Everyone does. You could be so much more. And Harry Potter, 11 years old, who had been offered greatness alone in a wand shop that afternoon, and in a blue leather book on his 10th birthday, and in a dozen hushes in a dozen doorways, gave the Sorting Hat the answer his whole childhood had built in him. The answer that was the sum of a marigold jumper with a stag on it, and a clock that grew a hand for a stranger, and a father who said we come, and a sister who said you'll never stand alone, and he thought it back at the hat, plainly. Without heat, the truest thing he knew, I don't want to be more than the boy in the crooked house. The boy in the crooked house has got everything. You can keep the greatness if it only comes alone. Put me with my family. The hat was silent a moment, then very quietly, so only Harry heard it, in a voice that had sorted 1,000 years of children and was not, it seemed, often surprised. Do you know, in all my centuries, the ones who refuse the greatness are the only ones who were ever fit for it. There is a kind of strength, Harry Potter, that he who gave you that scar will never understand though he live 1,000 years, and it is not in your wand and it is not in your blood. It is in the answer you just gave me. He stood alone because he had nothing. You will never stand alone because you chose not to. Guard that. It is the only thing he cannot take. And then to the hall, ringing off the stone, Gryffindor, the Gryffindor table came apart. The twins stood on the bench and bellowed, we got Potter, until Percy made them sit, and Ron, who was sorted 3 names later and joined them red and beaming, dropped into the seat beside Harry with the look of a boy who had set down a great worry, and Hermione, across the table, did the nod, the firm one, the one that meant a thing had gone exactly as it should. Harry, settling among them, looked up once at the high table. Albus Dumbledore was watching him. The headmaster sat in the great central chair under the candles, an old man in spectacles with a beard like spun silver, and he was watching Harry over the heads of the feasting school with an expression Harry had seen before twice at a kitchen table and on a staircase, the warmth and the keen thing underneath it, and Harry understood, in the way he understood the wand and the book and the song, that the old man had come to this feast expecting to see a particular boy. A boy alone in a crowd. A boy hungry for a place, a boy ready to be filled with whatever kind grandfatherly voice cared to pour into him, a boy who would look up at the high table with the lost, grateful, lonely eyes of someone who had never belonged anywhere, and find there a wise old man only too glad to belong to. That was not the boy looking back at him. The boy looking back at him was wedged between a brother and a sister at the loudest table in the hall, with a fork in his hand and a smear of treacle on his sleeve, entirely belonged to, entirely full, looking up at the high table not with hunger but with the calm, clear, faintly wary regard of a child who has been told, by a father on a platform that very morning, exactly what to watch for. And Harry saw the old man see it. He saw the warmth stay and the calculation move behind it, the long arithmetic begin again, the recalculation of a plan whose first sum had been a lonely boy and whose lonely boy had failed, somehow, 11 years ago at a garden gate to materialize. Dumbledore inclined his head, the smallest bow, one player acknowledging across a board a move he had not foreseen. Harry inclined his back. And then he turned to Ron, who was asking him whether he thought the suits of armor could be made to dance, and let the high table go because the treacle tart had arrived, and Hermione was reciting the entire history of the Sorting Hat to a fascinated Neville, and Percy was being pompous, and the twins were plotting, and the candles floated, and the ceiling held its impossible stars, and Harry Potter sat down to his first supper at Hogwarts, surrounded on every side, exactly as he meant to go on. That night in the round red dormitory at the top of Gryffindor Tower, in a 4-poster bed of his own with hangings the color of the Burrow's best blanket, Harry could not sleep, and not from worry. Across the room Ron was already snoring, and Neville, and a boy called Dean, and a boy called Seamus. The castle creaked around him, an older and grander creaking than the Burrows, and he lay listening to it and found, after a while, that he knew which sounds it made and which it did not. the way he had learned the Burrow, and that the learning of a new house was a thing he knew how to do, because he had been taught the most important lesson there was about houses, which is that they are only ever as good as who is in them. He got up quietly, skipping the floorboard that he had already worked out groaned, and went down the spiral stair to the common room where the fire had burned low, and he was not surprised, not in the least, to find Hermione already there, curled in the big chair by the embers in the otter jumper over her nightdress, with Hogwarts, a history open on her knees and not being read. "Couldn't sleep," she said. It was not a question. "Couldn't sleep," he agreed, and folded down onto the hearthrug at her feet the way he had folded onto the floor of the reading nook 100 times, and they looked at the fire. "The turban," Hermione said at last, low. "And the scar, it started then. The thing we always knew would start. We're inside it now, Harry. The school, the headmaster, whatever's under that turban. We're in the middle of it." "Yeah," said Harry. "Are you scared?" He thought about it, all the way down, the way Arthur had taught him. "No," he said, and found it was true. "I keep waiting to be, but I keep—" He looked up at her, at the firelight on her face, at the girl who had come to doorstep shaking and now sat squared and steady against whatever the turban held. "I keep thinking about what the hat said, that he stood alone because he had nothing, and I've got everything. I've got you and Ron asleep up there, and a whole tower full of, and Mum and Dad and Owl away, and Ginny watching the clock. He hasn't got a single person in the world who'd cross a room for him. That's what made him what he is, and it's the one thing I'm never going to have in common with him, no matter what's under my scar." He poked the embers. "So no, I'm not scared. I think he should be." Hermione looked at him for a long moment over the top of her book. Then she reached down and ruffled his impossible hair the way Molly did, and the way the twins did, and the way nobody at this whole grand school but the people who loved him would ever dare to, and she said, "Bed, both of us. We've got Transfiguration first thing, and I'm not having you fall asleep in it. You'll let the family down." They went up each to their own stair and tapped, out of long habit, on the cold stone of the archway between the staircases twice, and from the dark of the girl's stair, faint, 2 taps came back. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, The Stone in the Shade. Hogwarts, it turned out, was a great deal like the Burrow, in that it was old and crooked and held together by magic and full of people, and a great deal unlike it in that several of the people wanted Harry dead. He did not learn this all at once. He learned it the way he learned everything, by paying attention, which his whole childhood had trained him to do, and by comparing notes with Hermione, who paid attention the way a hawk pays attention to a field. The first weeks were good. They went to Hagrid's hut for tea the very first week, as promised, and ate rock cakes that could have been used to repair the castle, and listened to Hagrid talk about creatures with a tenderness that made Harry think of Arthur and his plugs. And Hagrid told them, glowing, about a 3-headed dog he had recently acquired and named Fluffy, and then went purple and said he should not have said that, forget he said that, and changed the subject so hard the teapot rattled. Hermione looked at Harry. Harry looked at Hermione. Neither of them forgot it. They had lessons, and Hermione was, exactly as Harry had promised the train, top of everyone, her hand in the air before the teachers finished the question, so that the other first-years rolled their eyes and Harry watched, quietly proud. The girl who had once believed herself an accident answering every question in the school as though the answers had been waiting in her all along for someone to ask. He was good himself, better than he had expected, especially at defense, which the turbaned Professor Quirrell taught in a stammering, nervous fog that made the lessons nearly useless, and the man himself nearly impossible to read, except that whenever Harry sat near the front his scar gave its small hot pulse, the same it had given at the feast, regular as a dripping tap. "It's him," Harry told Hermione and Ron, in the corner of the library where they had set up what Hermione called operations and Ron called the homework prison. "Quirrell, whenever I'm near him, it's not pain exactly, it's recognition, like the box in the shed. The scar knows him, or knows something that's near him." "The turban," said Hermione. "He never takes it off. He smells of garlic, supposedly to keep off a vampire he met in Romania, only nobody met any vampire." Ron asked the Romanian boy in Ravenclaw, "and there's no story going round Romania about a hero who fought one, and you'd think there would be, wouldn't you, if it had happened?" She had 3 books open and was taking notes in a way that connected them with arrows. "He's hiding something under it, and he stammers far more in the Great Hall than he does when he thinks no one's listening. I've heard him in the 3rd-floor corridor talking to himself perfectly clearly, and the 3rd-floor corridor is the one we were all very specifically told would mean a painful death, which is a strange thing to tell a school full of children unless you want them to wonder what's down there." "You think the dog's down there," said Ron. "Fluffy." "I think Fluffy's guarding the thing Hagrid brought up from the vault," said Hermione. "The thing that was moved to the school to be kept safe that he told us about over the ice cream, and I think Quirrell wants it, and I think—" She lowered her voice, and the arrows on her parchment all pointed now to one word she had written and boxed. "I think the reason your scar knows him is that whatever's under that turban isn't only Quirrell." The word she had boxed was a name. Harry looked at it, written in Hermione's small, fierce hand in the safe lamplit corner of the library, and the cold came, and Ron went pale, and none of them said it aloud, because saying it aloud was a thing they were not ready to do. What they found out over that long autumn and winter, piece by piece, in the library and from Hagrid's slips and from the twins, who could get into anywhere and were persuaded to scout in exchange for nothing more than the joy of being asked, was this. The thing in the vault was a philosopher's stone, the only one in the world, which made gold and made its owner deathless, and it had belonged to a 600-year-old alchemist who was a friend of Dumbledore's, and Dumbledore had moved it to Hogwarts when the vault that held it had been broken into. The very summer day, Harry worked out with a jolt that they had eaten ice cream with Hagrid, who had emptied that exact vault hours before the breaking in. And Dumbledore had hidden the stone behind a series of protections. It was Hermione who saw what was wrong with the protections, and the seeing of it changed everything. "Look," she said, one night in the deserted common room after they had pieced the obstacles together, Fluffy, and then a series of enchantments laid by the teachers, each one a different kind of test. "Fluffy, you get past with music. Anyone who's read about Cerberus knows that it's in 3 books I could name. Then there's a plant that the whole of first-year herbology would recognize, then a charm, then a flying key puzzle that wants a good flyer, and a chess game and a riddle with logic, and at the end, supposedly the stone itself behind some last thing Dumbledore did himself." She put her hands flat on the table, the gesture she made when she was about to say a thing she had checked all the way down and did not like. "Harry, Ron, those aren't protections. Think about it properly. The most powerful wizard alive wants to keep the only philosopher's stone in the world out of the hands of the most dangerous wizard who ever lived. And he guards it with a dog you stop with a lullaby, a plan a child knows, and a chess set. That wouldn't keep me out for a weekend. It certainly wouldn't keep him out." She tapped the boxed name without writing it again. "So either Albus Dumbledore is a fool, which he is famously not, or the obstacles aren't there to keep someone out." "Then what are they there for?" said Ron. Hermione looked at Harry, and Harry, who had grown up watching a kind old man do long arithmetic behind his eyes, felt the answer arrive cold and whole. "They're there to be passed," Harry said slowly, "by the right person. They're there, of course, like the obstacle course Charlie set up in the orchard to test whether you were ready for the real brooms." He met Hermione's eyes. "He's not hiding the stone, he's setting an examination. And the flyer and the chess and the logic, the bits a clever, brave first year could just about do if they had a flyer and a thinker between them." The cold deepened. "He built it for us, for me. He wants to see if I'll go down there. He wants to see what I do when the thing that killed my parents comes for me. It's a test, and I'm the one being tested, and the stone's only the bait." The fire popped in the grate. Somewhere above them the castle creaked its ancient creak. "That's monstrous," said Hermione very quietly. "If that's true, that's Harry, that's monstrous. He'd be using the stone to bait the worst wizard in the world into a school full of children to test an 11-year-old. "Yeah," said Harry. He found, examining it, that he was not even surprised, which was somehow the worst part. He would, because he doesn't see it as monstrous. He sees it as necessary. That's the thing about him. He's already decided I'm the one who has to face it someday, and he's running a practice where he can watch and catch me if I fall this time, so I'm ready the time he can't. He thought of his father on the platform, the still face, the words, "You're not a part of his load, you write home that same hour." He's forgotten one thing, though. "What?" said Ron. Harry stood up. He felt in that moment more like Arthur Weasley's son than he ever had. "I was raised to write home," said Harry. "He built this whole thing on the idea that I'd go down there alone. Brave and alone, like the book he sent me, like the wizard whose wand is brother to mine. He's been planning my brave, lonely night for years." He went to the dormitory stairs. "So we're not going to give him one. Hermione, where's the good parchment? I'm writing to Dad tonight, the whole of it. And then we're going to do the one thing in the world Albus Dumbledore hasn't planned for, because he's never once in his life done it himself." "Which is," said Hermione, already fetching the parchment, because she always knew when a thing was decided. "Ask for help," said Harry. The letter went that night on Hypatia's swift, severe wings, and the answer came back at dawn, and it was pure Arthur Weasley. He did not tell Harry not to worry. He did not tell him he was imagining things. He took it seriously, every word, because his son did not make things up, and that taking seriously was worth more to Harry than an army. "I have spoken to Professor McGonagall by flu this morning," Arthur wrote. "She's a sensible woman, and she is now watching Quirrell in the corridor both. I have told her what you told me, and she did not laugh, which tells you she has had her own suspicions. Bill is coming up to the village on Gringotts business that I have invented for him, and will be an hour from the castle from Friday. You are not to go down to that corridor, Harry. Do you hear me? You have done the brave and the clever thing already, which was to tell someone who can help. That is the bravest thing there is, and almost nobody does it. Let the grown-ups carry this now. We come, remember, we come, your loving Dad. P.S. Your mother says she is knitting and that you are to eat properly, and that if a single hair on any of your heads is harmed, she will come up that mountain herself, and the Dark Lord can take a number." Harry read it twice and felt the warmth of it go all the way down, and for 3 days it held, and the grown-ups carried it, and it might have ended there, quietly, the great test foiled by the simple expedient of a boy who told his dad, if the other side had not also been watching the calendar. On the 4th day, Dumbledore was called away. An urgent summons from the ministry, the school was told, the chief warlock needed in London, back tomorrow. Harry heard it at breakfast and went cold, and across the table Hermione had gone still, and Ron, slower but getting there, said, "Hang on, hang on. The one night the strongest wizard in the school is gone." "It's tonight," said Hermione. "Whatever's under the turban waited until the only person it's truly afraid of was out of the castle. Of course it did. It's clever. It's been clever for 50 years. Tonight." They went to McGonagall. They went at once, the three of them, and McGonagall listened, sharp and gray and not laughing, and told them she would see to it, that she would alert the staff and double the watch on the corridor, and that they were to go to their dormitory and stay there and trust the adults, which was, Harry knew, exactly right, and exactly what his father had said, and exactly what they would have done. Except that an hour later the twins, who had been scouting, came to the common room gray-faced for once with no joke in them at all, and said that they had seen Professor Quirrell go into the third-floor corridor, and that they had run to McGonagall's office to raise it, and that McGonagall had been called to the far side of the castle by a message that turned out, when they checked, to be false. And that by the time they had found another teacher, Quirrell had been in there 20 minutes and no one had gone in after him, because the entrance had been sealed behind him with a spell that 3 teachers were now failing to break. "He's in," said Fred. "He's past the door and they can't follow." "And Bill's still an hour out," said George. "Dad's fluing the school now but an hour, Harry. The stone hasn't got an hour. Whatever he wants it for, he's getting it tonight." Harry stood very still in the middle of the common room with his family's plan in pieces around him. They had done everything right. They had told the grown-ups. They had not gone alone. They had asked for help, and the help was coming. And it was not going to be in time, because the other side had planned for the grown-ups too, had pulled Dumbledore out of the castle and McGonagall to the wrong tower, had thought of everything except the one thing nobody on the dark side ever thought of, which was a house full of children who had been raised to act together. "There's a way, and we know that the teachers don't," Harry said. "Hagrid told us how to get past Fluffy. We know the whole course. Hermione mapped it. The teachers are trying to break down the front door. We could be at the stone before they're through." He looked round at them. "I'm not asking anyone to come. Dad said stay in the tower, and Dad's right, and if you stay no one will think a thing of it. I mean that." "Shut up," said Ron conversationally, picking up his wand. "We're coming," said Hermione in the voice that ended discussions. "That was never a question, so stop wasting the hour pretending it was. Fred, George, get the message to your dad and Bill. Tell them which way we've gone so they can follow, and tell McGonagall the instant anyone will listen. Ginny's not here to watch the clock, so you two watch the door. We go down, we slow him down, we stay alive until the grown-ups get through. That's the plan. Nobody's a hero. Nobody stands alone. We slow him down and we wait for the family." Say it back. "Slow him down and wait for the family," said Harry and Ron together, and Harry thought, even then, even there, that there had never been a battle plan in the history of the world he would rather follow. They went down through the sleeping castle, and they got past Fluffy with the little wooden flute Hagrid had carved Harry for Christmas, 3 notes over and over until the 3 great heads sagged and snored, and they dropped through the trapdoor onto the devil's snare, and Harry felt it seize him, the dark coils tightening, and did not panic, because he had grown up among gnomes and ghouls and twins, and knew the worst thing you could do to a trap was thrash. It likes the dark and the damp. Hermione was already saying, already pointing her vinewood wand, the wand that had chosen her for being too much. "Stop struggling, both of you. The more you fight, the tighter. Just, I've got it, I've got it." And a jet of bright bluebell flame bloomed in the dark, and the plant recoiled shrieking and dropped them through, and Ron said, gasping, "Lucky she pays attention in herbology," and Hermione said, "Lucky one of us does," and despite everything they were grinning as they ran on. The flying keys were Harry's. There were 1,000 of them swarming under a high stone ceiling, and one old battered silver one with a bent wing that fit the lock, and a broomstick waiting, and Harry kicked off into the air and forgot, for 30 seconds, every dark thing in the world. This was the orchard. This was the patched toy broom and the crabapple turn that no one had taught him. The keys came at him in a swarm, and he rolled and climbed and stooped the way he had stooped 1,000 times for a snitch that was really a walnut Charlie had charmed, and he had the bent silver key in his fist and was down and through the door before the swarm could regroup, and Ron said, "James Potter," under his breath with something close to reverence, and Harry said, "Shut up," and loved him. The chamber beyond was a chessboard vast, the pieces tall as horsemen, black and white, and the way across was a game, and the game wanted to be played, and there was only one of them who could play it. Ron looked at the board a long time. Harry watched him do the thing his whole family did, the thing the dark side never learned, which was to look at a problem and ask not how do I win, but what does this cost and who pays it. "I have to be a knight," Ron said at last, quietly. "And to win, the knight has to be taken. There's no way across that doesn't go through the middle, and the middle's covered, and the only piece that can clear it and let you reach the king is," he swallowed, "it's the knight. I'll have to let myself be taken so you two can get across. It's the only line that works. I've gone through it 4 times. It's the only one." "No," said Hermione. "No, Ron, absolutely not. We said nobody's a hero. It's not being a hero, said Ron, and he sounded suddenly exactly like Arthur, exactly like the man who had taught all of them that the trick to a thing is usually the cost of it. It's chess. Somebody who's good at chess works out the move that wins and what it costs, and they pay it because that's the game. I'm good at chess, Hermione. It's the one thing I'm better at than you. Let me be good at it. He climbed onto the great stone knight, and it came alive under him. Harry, when the queen takes me, you go straight on to the king. Don't stop, don't look. You check the king and we win and you go on. Promise me you won't stop. The grown-ups are coming. Mum'll have my hide if I let you stop and get caught fussing over me. Promise. I promise, said Harry, and it was the hardest promise he had ever made. They played. It was terrible and it was beautiful, the great pieces smashing each other to rubble across the stone. And at the end the White Queen swept across the board and brought her stone arm down on Ron's knight, and Ron flew and hit the floor and lay still. And Hermione screamed and did not run to him because Harry caught her arm and said, "The grown-ups, Hermione, the grown-ups are coming for him. That's the whole plan. We hold to the plan," with tears on his own face, and the way to the king lay open. And Harry made the last move and the king threw down his sword, and the two of them ran on, leaving Ron breathing on the stone for the family to find, into the next room, and the next, the troll already down by something ahead of them. The potions riddle that Hermione read once and solved in under a minute because of course she did, narrowing the bottles by pure logic while Harry watched her be the cleverest person ever to stand in that black room. There were two bottles that mattered. One to go forward through the black fire to the stone, one to go back through the purple to Ron and the others. There was enough in the forward bottle for one. Hermione looked at it. Then she looked at Harry, and Harry saw her do the arithmetic, the real arithmetic, the kind Dumbledore did with his head and the Weasleys did with their hearts, and he knew what canon and caution in every sensible book would have her do, which was drink the back bottle and go for help and let him go on alone, the brave lone boy, exactly as the man who built this gauntlet had designed. "There's only enough for one," Harry said. "You go back, get to Ron, get to the grown-ups, tell them where I am. I'll hold him off till they come. That's still the plan. Slow him down, wait for the family." "No," said Hermione. "Hermione, there's only enough for one. Then I'll make more," said Hermione Granger, and pulled out the little potions kit she carried everywhere because she was Hermione, and the spare phials, and she was already measuring, hands steady, eyes bright and furious, "because I am extremely good at potions, and the riddle told me exactly which ingredients these are, and I am not Harry Potter, sending you through a wall of fire by yourself to face that thing because a book says the hero goes alone. We worked this out, he built it so you'd be alone. The whole trap, the whole plan, his and the other one's both, the entire thing only works if you go through that fire alone, so we are going to do the one thing that breaks both their plans at once." She poured and stirred and split the potion into two, her vinewood wand glowing over the phials, and her chin was up and her hand did not shake. "We're going through together, drink." And Harry Potter, who had been offered the lonely greatness by a wand and a book and a hat and a kind old man, looked at the girl who had come to a doorstep shaking and now stood doubling a potion by firelight so that he would not have to be brave by himself. And he drank and she drank, and they took each other's hands, and they walked through the black fire into the last room together. The last room was round and bare, and in the middle of it stood a tall mirror in a gold frame, and in front of the mirror, turning at the sound of them, stood Professor Quirrell, and he was not stammering at all. "Two of you," said Quirrell, and his voice had lost its fog entirely. It was smooth and cold and faintly amused. "How untidy. I was told the Potter boy would come alone. They always come alone, the heroes. It is practically the only reliable thing about them." His eyes went over Hermione with contempt. "A mudblood and a half-blood orphan, Dumbledore's great hope. Well, you can watch, girl, before you die. It may be instructive." "I shouldn't think so," said Hermione, whose hand was still in Harry's and whose voice did not shake. "We've read ahead." Quirrell ignored her. He had turned back to the mirror, and he was staring into it with a kind of starving hunger, and Harry understood that the mirror was the last protection, Dumbledore's own, and that Quirrell could not get past it. "I see the stone," Quirrell muttered. "I see myself presenting it to my master, but how do I reach it? Where is it?" And then from somewhere, from the man himself, from under the purple turban, came a second voice, a voice that was not a voice so much as a cold that learned to speak, high and thin and terrible, and at the sound of it Harry's scar split open with a pain that drove him to his knees. "Use the boy," said the voice. "Use the Potter boy." Quirrell rounded on Harry and seized him by the arm and dragged him before the mirror, and Harry, blind with the pain in his scar, looked up into the glass and saw himself. Not alone. That was the thing he would remember after, when Dumbledore tried to tell him the mirror showed his deepest desire, and Harry let him think it had shown what Dumbledore expected. It did not show him his dead parents, the way the old man assumed, the way it would have shown the lonely boy Dumbledore had spent years designing. It showed him the whole crooked kitchen of the Burrow, every hand of the clock at home, Molly at the range and Arthur with a plug and Ron breathing on a chessboard floor and Ginny watching the door and the twins mid-prank and Hermione, beside him, exactly as she was beside him now, and his mother and father standing behind them all with their hands on his shoulders, smiling at home at last in the family that had taken their son in. The mirror showed Harry Potter a full house. And in the glass his father reached into his pocket and drew out a blood-red stone and slipped it, with a wink, into Harry's reflected pocket, and Harry felt a sudden weight drop into his real one. "What do you see?" hissed Quirrell. "Tell me, what do you see?" "I see my family," said Harry, which was true and gave away nothing. "He lies," said the cold voice. "Let me speak to him, face to face." "Master, you're not strong enough. I have strength enough for this." And Quirrell reached up and unwound the purple turban and turned around, and where the back of the man's head should have been there was a face. A dreadful chalk-white face with red eyes and slits for nostrils. The most terrible thing Harry had ever seen, and it fixed its red eyes on him. And it was the thing that had killed his mother and father in a cottage at Godric's Hollow 11 years before, looking out at him through the back of a dead man's skull. "Harry Potter," said Lord Voldemort, "see what I have become. Shadow and vapor, I have form only when I share another's body, but there are those who will let me in, and the stone, Harry, the elixir of life, the stone will give me a body of my own." The red eyes glittered. "Give it to me. You hold it. I feel it. Give it to me, and you need not end as your parents did. You need not be brave and alone like all the foolish heroes before you. Join me, and we will keep your little mudblood friend alive, and your red-haired family, all of them untouched. I give you my word, I am not without mercy to those who are sensible. Or refuse me, boy, and watch the girl die first here on the stone, and then the others, one by one, beginning with the youngest, the little one who watches clocks." And there it was. The threat Harry had been raised, without knowing it, to answer. Not a threat to himself, a threat to them. Harry got to his feet. The pain in his scar was a white blaze, and he stood up into it anyway, because Arthur Weasley's son did not kneel when his family was threatened, and he stepped deliberately between Voldemort and Hermione. "You've got it wrong," Harry said, and his voice rang off the round stone walls. "You think I'm scared to die. You've always thought that's the lever with everyone, but I wasn't raised by people who are scared of dying. I was raised by people who aren't scared of living, which is harder and which you've never once managed." He felt Hermione's hand close on the back of his robes, anchoring him. "And you just made the same mistake the hat made and the books made and even Dumbledore makes. You think the worst thing you can threaten me with is being alone, but I'm not the one who's alone here. Look at you. Stuck on the back of a dead man's head, begging an 11-year-old for a rock, and not one single creature in the whole world would cross a room to help you." He shook his head. "Take the stone. You can't have the people. The people aren't yours to bargain with. They never will be." "Seize him," screamed Voldemort. "Take the stone. Kill the girl." Quirrell lunged. He caught Hermione by the throat, and Harry did not think, did not plan, did the thing his whole life had built into his hands, which was to put himself between the people he loved in the dark, and he flung himself at Quirrell and seized the man's wrist to drag him off her, and Quirrell screamed. He screamed because where Harry touched him, his skin blistered and seared and burned, blackening like paper in a fire, and Harry did not let go. He held on. He held the man's burning wrist with both hands and put his other hand flat against the side of that chalk-white snarling face, and it burned. All of it crumbled and burned under his hands, and it did not burn Harry at all. Later, Dumbledore would tell him it was Lily's protection, the love of a mother who died for him, living in his very skin, and that was true as far as it went. But Harry knew, holding on while Quirrell crumbled to ash beneath his hands, that it was more than that and older and larger. It was a marigold jumper with a stag on it. It was a clock that grew a hand for a stranger. It was 11 years of being sung the Prouette song through a wall, and a wooden box for the people you keep inside you, and a father who said we come, and a mother who said the Dark Lord can take a number, and a sister who doubled a potion by firelight so he would not be brave alone. It was every ordinary, unremarkable act of love that had been poured into him, day on day, since a baby reached up and took hold of a strand of red hair and did not cry. Lily had lit the fire, but a whole family had kept it burning for 11 years, fed it and banked it, and never once let it go out, until it was not a spark in him any longer but a hearth, a great roaring Burrow hearth, and the thing that had only ever known cold could not lay a finger on it and live. Quirrell fell. The body crumbled to ash and the ash settled, and out of it rose the shade, the vapor, the cold that had learned to speak, black and screaming. And it gathered itself and flung itself at Harry in a last fury, and passed through him, over him, and the scar blazed white, and for one endless instant Harry was inside the cold, and the cold was inside him, and they knew each other, the two pieces of the same broken thing, the splinter in his head and the ruin that had made it, recognizing itself across the gulf. And Harry heard or felt a single word in the cold that was not spoken to him so much as torn out of it as it fled. Wrong. He is wrong. He is full. There is no room in him. And then the cold tore free and shot through the chamber and was gone, up and out and away, north and away, to wherever broken things go to wait. And Harry fell to the stone floor with the red weight of the stone in his pocket and Hermione's hands on his face and her voice saying his name. And the last thing he saw before the dark took him was the door bursting open, and Arthur Weasley coming through it at a dead run with his wand up and his face wild, his father who had said we come and who had come. He woke in the hospital wing 3 days later, and the first thing he saw was the clock. Someone had brought it. The Burrow's clock, the great battered golden clock with its 11 hands, was propped on the table beside his bed where his eyes would find it first, and every single hand on it pointed at one word, a word that was not on any other clock in the world and had been put there, he learned later, by Molly, who had charmed a 12th space onto her grandmother's clock for the occasion and labeled it herself. The word was together. And all 11 hands pointed at it, and around the bed, asleep in chairs, draped over the foot of it, curled on the next bed along were the people the hands belonged to. Molly, Arthur, Bill, Percy, Fred, George, Ron, his arm in a sling, snoring, Ginny, who had been brought from the Burrow and refused to leave, and Hermione in the chair closest, holding his hand even in her sleep, the otter jumper over her uniform, a book open and fallen on her chest. Harry lay still and looked at them all and let the warmth come and did not wake them and was, for a while, completely happy. Ginny woke first, the way she woke first for everything, and saw his eyes open and did not shout, which from Ginny was the measure of how frightened she had been. She just got up very quietly and put her hand in his free one and said, "You came back," in a voice that wobbled, and that woke Hermione, and that woke the rest of them in a cascade, and then it was Bedlam, the good Bedlam, the Burrow Bedlam, transplanted whole into a hospital wing. Molly got to him first and held his face in both hands and looked at him the way she had looked at him on a garden path 11 years before, taking inventory of a child, and then she did the thing only Molly could do, which was to weep and scold in the same breath. "You went down there," she said, "you went down to that thing after your father wrote you expressly, Harry James Potter, you have taken 10 years off me, and you," she rounded on Ron, who quailed in his sling, "letting a chess set knock you flat, I have never, and you, on Hermione, who did not quail, doubling an unsupervised potion under a wall of fire, do you know the things that can go wrong, do you?" And Hermione said, "Yes, actually all of them, I checked, that's why it worked." And Molly stopped and looked at her and pulled her in and kissed the top of her bushy head fiercely and said, "Of course you did. Of course you did, my clever girl," and Harry understood that the scolding had been the love all along, turned inside out, the way it always was with Molly. "You should have seen Ron," said Harry, because Ron was sitting at the edge of it going red, the way the youngest brother goes red when nobody's looking at him, and Harry would not have that, not after the chessboard. "Mum. You should have seen him. He worked out the whole game, the only line that won, and it cost him being taken, and he climbed up on that night and made me promise to go on without him so he'd get there in time, and he was right, it was the only line, I've thought about it, and there wasn't another. He saved the whole thing, he's the best chess player I've ever seen, and he gave himself up to win it." The wing went quiet. Ron had gone from red to a color with no name. "Is that so?" said Arthur, who had not said much, who was sitting close with his hand on Ron's good shoulder, and his voice was thick. "Is that so, Ron? It was just chess, Dad," Ron mumbled. "It was not just chess," said Arthur Weasley, "and you know it was not, and so do I, and so will everyone in this family for the rest of your life, because we are going to tell it at every Christmas until you are sick of it." He gripped the shoulder. "You worked out the cost and you paid it so your brother and sister could go on. That's the bravest kind there is, the quiet kind, the kind nobody puts in books." He glanced just once at the high window and the school beyond it, and something crossed his gentle face. "The kind certain people would do well to learn exists." Dumbledore came that evening, when the others had been sent to eat. He sat by the bed, an old man with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles, and eyes that twinkled, and underneath did the arithmetic, and he told Harry that he had been very brave, and that the stone had been destroyed now safely with old Flamel's blessing, and that Voldemort would return, for he had not been truly killed, only delayed. And he told him about Lily's love, the protection in his skin. He told it beautifully. He told it the way you tell a child a story you need them to believe. And Harry, 11 years old, propped on his pillows, looked at the kind old face and understood, in a way he could not have at the feast, the full shape of the man. He saw the genuine relief in him that Harry was alive. He saw the genuine fondness. And he saw underneath the faint, carefully hidden thing that he had no name for yet but would, disappointment. Not that Harry had survived, that Harry had survived wrong. That the boy who was supposed to have faced the dark alone, and been forged lonely and grateful and pliable in the facing of it, had instead written home and gone down with a brother and a sister, and been saved not by a destiny the old man could shape, but by a love the old man could not control or claim or take credit for. The test had been passed, but it had been passed by the wrong boy, the full boy, the boy in the crooked house, and the old man's long arithmetic was going to have to be done all over again. "Sir," said Harry when Dumbledore had finished the beautiful story, "why did you send me that book on my 10th birthday, Champions of the Light, Wizards Who Stood Alone?" For just a moment the twinkle stilled. "I thought," said Dumbledore carefully, "that you might one day need to know that great things can be born." "They can," Harry agreed. "I just don't think they have to be born alone. I don't think they ever should be. I think that's the lie, sir, the one everybody keeps trying to teach me. That the great ones do it alone." He met the blue eyes steadily. "My dad came through that door at a dead run. Hermione doubled a potion so I wouldn't go through the fire by myself. Ron let a stone queen knock him out so we could get past. That's how it got done, sir. Not alone, never once alone. And I think, with respect, that the day everyone stops trying to make me face it alone is the day we actually start winning." There was a long silence in the hospital wing, the candles guttered. The clock on the table held all its hands at together, and Albus Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment, and something moved in his ancient face that might, in a younger man, have been the beginning of doubt, or the beginning of grief, or the beginning of hope, and he said, very quietly, "You may be right, Harry. You may be a good deal righter than an old man who has spent 100 years standing alone is comfortable admitting." He rose, and at the door he paused and looked back not at Harry, but at the clock, at the 12th word Molly had charmed onto it that no clock in the world had ever needed before. Together, he read softly to himself, "How extraordinary, I never thought to put that on a clock." And he went out, and Harry heard, fading down the corridor, the family coming back from supper, loud and warm and entirely his, and he turned his face to the window where, far to the north, the dark had fled, and he was not afraid of it, because he knew exactly how much room there was in him, and there was none for the cold, none at all, the whole house of him was full. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The shadow lengthens the years between went the way the good years go, fast and full, so that afterward Harry could not always say which summer a thing had happened in, only that it had happened at the Burrow, which was answer enough. There was the year a diary came into the school, a black diary that fed on a girl's loneliness and tried to open an old horror beneath the castle, and it had chosen, of all the lonely children in the school, a Weasley, which had been its mistake, because a Weasley is never lonely for long. Ginny had felt the thing turning her thoughts, and had done the one thing in the world its master had never planned for, the thing the family had been teaching each other since a baby took hold of a strand of red hair. She had told someone. She had gone to Hermione, white and shaking, and laid the diary on the table between them and said, "I think this book is writing back, and I think it's wrong, and I'm frightened." And Hermione had not laughed, and Harry had not laughed, and they had taken it to Dumbledore by daylight with the whole family at their backs, and the old man had destroyed it himself with the long curved fang of a dead basilisk, his face graver than they had ever seen it, murmuring, "Another, that is another, how many did he make?" In a voice that was not meant for them to hear. They had not understood it then. They understood it later. The diary had been a piece, like the locket in the lead box, like the splinter under Harry's scar, and Voldemort had scattered pieces of himself across the world like a man hiding the keys to his own death, and Albus Dumbledore had spent years finding them alone and telling no one, because telling no one was the only way he knew how to do anything. There was the year of the Great Rebirth. They were 14, and the thing in the north that had been shadow and vapor found servants enough and dark magic enough to make itself a body again, in a graveyard in the dark, off a bone and a hand and a drop of blood, and it walked the earth once more with red eyes and a face like a snake, and the wizarding world, which had spent 13 years pretending the cold had gone for good, woke to find it had only been waiting. Harry had felt it happen through the scar the night it happened, and had not gone north to meet it alone as a certain old man's whole design required, because by then Harry Potter telling his family when his scar burned was as automatic as breathing, and the family had raised the alarm, and the alarm had robbed the rebirth of the prize it most wanted, which was Harry himself, present alone to be killed at the moment of return. He had cheated the graveyard simply by being at the Burrow, in his own bed, with Ron snoring across the room and the clock downstairs holding all its hands at home. Voldemort had risen, but he had risen without the death he had built the whole ritual around, and a thing built crooked never stands quite straight, and he knew it, and it made him careful and afraid in the way only the proud are afraid, which is the most dangerous way of all. And there were the ordinary things, which were not ordinary at all, which were the whole point. There was Ginny coming to Hogwarts at last, fierce and quick and exactly as good as Hermione had said years ago on an orchard wall, making the Quidditch team in her second year, and the twins weeping with pride. There were the twins themselves, who left the school in a blaze of fireworks that spelled a word across the great hall that Molly pretended to disapprove of, and kept a photograph of by her bed. There was Percy, who went into the ministry and grew pompous, and then, in the dark days when the ministry pretended Voldemort had not returned, grew briefly estranged, and then came home one rainy night and wept in the kitchen and was forgiven before he had finished, because the Burrow did not do estrangement, the Burrow did adding on, even adding back. There was Bill and a Cursebreaker's scars and a girl from France. There was Treacle Tart and the orchard and the clock with its 12th word together that had stayed on it ever since the hospital wing, and that no one ever explained to visitors, and that the family never needed explained. And there was Hermione, who was Harry's, and whom Harry was beginning, around the time they turned 16, to understand he loved in a way he had not got a tidy word for. He had always loved her. That was not new, that was as old as the cold hall, where a frightened girl had asked him his name. What was new was the trouble it gave him, suddenly in the summer they were 16, to be in a room with her and not look at her. The way her hand on his sleeve, which had anchored him through 1,000 storms, had begun to mean something his stomach had opinions about. The way he found himself memorizing the particular furious line she got between her eyebrows when a book disappointed her, and storing it up, the way you store a thing you have decided you cannot do without. He told no one. There was no one to tell. The one person he told everything to was the person he could not tell this. So he carried it badly, the way you carry a thing too big for your arms, and he watched her not notice, or he thought she did not notice, and he was wrong, because Hermione Granger noticed everything and had noticed this some while before he had, and was carrying her own version of it down her own side of the same wall, and was, being Hermione, researching it. The war came to the Burrow on a night in August, and it came, as the dark always came, for the thing that the light most loved. They had grown used to the wards by then. Arthur had spent years quietly layering the old house in protections, the patient, unglamorous kind, the kind a man builds the way he builds a torch out of a skip, and Bill had come home and added the professional kind, cursebreaker's work, knots of magic in the door frames and the chimney and the well. The Burrow was not a fortress. It was better than a fortress. It was a thing so loved that the love had soaked into the mortar. The little mortar there was, and old magic of that kind is not on any ministry register and not in any of the books, and the dark underestimated it, because the dark always underestimates the things it cannot feel. It was past midnight, and Harry was awake because his scar had been prickling all evening like a struck match held too near, when the first curse hit the wards and the whole house rang like a bell. After that it was very fast. They had drilled this, which Harry would be grateful for to the end of his days. Molly had drilled them grimly all that dark summer, the way she did everything, with a wooden spoon and no patience for argument. If the wards go, the little ones to the cellar, the rest to your places, wands up, and nobody plays the hero. We fight as a family or not at all. So when the bell note rang, the house did not panic. The house deployed. Ginny and the youngest cousins who were staying went down. Bill took the front. Arthur took the kitchen door. Molly took the stair. Harry and Ron and Hermione, 16 and trained and furious, took the windows, because 3 good young wands at 3 high windows could see the whole garden, and the garden was full of hooded figures coming up through Molly's vegetables in the dark, 10 of them 12 masks like bone in the wandlight. Hold the windows, Bill called, calm as a held breath, the calm of a man who broke curses for a living. Don't go out, make them come to the house is on our side. It was. The first Death Eater to reach the kitchen door went through Arthur's patient years of work and came out the other side believing, for an hour, that he was a chicken, and went pecking and flapping back into the dark to the great confusion of his fellows. The chimney spat green fire at a man who tried it, the well sang. And at the windows Harry and Hermione and Ron did the thing they had done since they were 11 on a chessboard, which was to fight as one creature with 3 wands, Hermione calling the shield charms in the steady voice that had doubled a potion under fire, Ron watching the angles the way he watched a chessboard, Harry fast and sure, faster than any of them, the orchard in his hands turned at last to something deadlier than catching walnuts. They might have held it clean. They nearly did. But there is always one who gets through, and the one who got through that night was tall and silver-masked and very good, and he came not at the strong points, but at the cellar, at the soft underside, at the little ones, and it was Arthur who saw it, Arthur who left his held door and ran. Gentle Arthur Weasley, who had never in his life raised his wand in anger, and raised it now between a killing curse and his youngest daughter, coming up the cellar stairs to fight because Ginny Weasley would never in her life stay in a cellar. The green light took Arthur in the chest. He had turned it, it would have struck Ginny full, and it struck Arthur glancing, which is the difference between dead and dying, and he went down on the kitchen flags without a sound, and Ginny screamed, and Molly came down the stair like the wrath of God. Harry had seen his mother angry. He had seen her face down Dumbledore in her own kitchen. He had never seen this. Molly Weasley stepped over her fallen husband and put her body between the silver-masked man and her children, and she did not shout. She said very quietly in the flat voice with a name in it, "Not my family," and what she did then was not in any book either, was old and red and Pruett and terrible, and the silver-masked man, who was very good indeed, lasted 4 seconds against a mother at the door of her home, and then there was one fewer hooded figure in the world, and Molly was already turning, already on her knees in her husband's blood, already roaring for Bill, for Dittany, for help. While Harry and Ron and Hermione poured fire from the windows to cover her, and the wards sang their last, and the order came at last out of the dark, McGonagall and Moody and a dozen wands, and the hooded figures broke and fled into the night they had come from, leaving their dead and their chicken behind. And on the wall, through all of it, the clock had been doing a thing it had only done twice before in Harry's life. Every hand had swung to mortal peril, all of them, the whole family at once, and held there, quivering through the long minutes of the fight. And as the Death Eaters fled and the order flooded in, and Molly pressed Dittany into the wound in her husband's chest with hands that did not shake because she would not let them, the hands began one by one to creep back, Bill's to home, Ron's, the cousins, Ginny's last and slowest, her hand on her father's. They came back to home, all of them, all but one. Arthur's hand did not come back to home. It crept from mortal peril slowly, terribly, while they watched, and it stopped, and it hung, trembling exactly between mortal peril and a word the clock had on its face that the family never spoke and tried never to look at. And there it stayed all that long night, neither here nor gone, while Molly knelt over him and would not move, and the Dittany hissed, and the green dawn came up gray over the marsh. he lived. It took 3 healers and the better part of a week, and there were days the clock hand hung trembling on the edge of the unspeakable word, and the whole family went quiet around it, watching, the way Ginny had once watched it for Harry. But Arthur Weasley was made of patient, unglamorous stuff, the kind that holds a torch together and a family and a life. And on the 4th day his hand crept back from the edge, and on the 7th it came home, and the first thing he said when he woke, in a thread of a voice with his wife asleep at last in the chair beside him, and all his children jammed into a hospital room that was not built for so many Weasleys, was, "Did Ginny get out of the cellar all right?" And Ginny burst into tears and flung herself on him, and he said, "Ow, and there, and I'm all right, sweetheart, your old dad's a tougher plug than he looks," and the family folded itself around the bed and held on, and did not let go for a very long time. Harry stood at the foot of the bed with Hermione's hand in his, holding on the way the otters held on so they would not drift apart on the current, and he looked at the man who had run from a held door to put himself between the dark and a child, and he understood something with his whole body that he had only understood before with his head. This was the war now. It had come into the kitchen. It had spilled his father's blood on the flags where he had eaten 10,000 breakfasts. And it had come not for the wizarding world and not for some abstract light, but here specifically, deliberately, for the one thing in Britain that made Harry Potter strong, because the thing in the North had finally understood what Albus Dumbledore had failed to engineer and Lord Voldemort had failed to break, and both of them in their different ways had spent 16 years underestimating, that Harry's family was not his weakness, it was his armor. And the dark had decided that August night that the only way to get at the boy was to burn the armor off him, one beloved person at a time. "They'll come again," Harry said quietly to Hermione at the foot of the bed. "Now they know it's the way to hurt me, they'll keep coming for them." "Yes," said Hermione. She did not offer a comforting version. She never had. "They will. Then something has to change," said Harry. "I can't just keep being the reason the people I love get attacked in their own kitchen. I have to end it, the actual thing, not hide behind them while they bleed for me." "Yes," said Hermione again, and her hand tightened on his. "But not alone, Harry, whatever ending it means. We worked that out when we were 6, and we've been right ever since. You don't end it by walking off alone into the dark like the books want. We end it, all of us. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference, and I will fight you about it until one of us is dead, and given the company we keep, that's not the figure of speech it used to be." She almost smiled. "So, we find out what ending it actually takes, properly, no more guessing. We make Dumbledore tell us everything he's been carrying alone, because he's been carrying something about you specifically for 16 years. I've watched him do it, and it's time he put it on the table, because it's your life and it's our family, and we have bled enough to have earned the truth." They brought Arthur home as soon as the healers would allow it, which was sooner than the healers would have liked, because Arthur Weasley pointed out, reasonably in his thread of a voice, that he would mend twice as fast in a house that smelled of his wife's cooking as in a ward that smelled of disinfectant, and because Molly, who had not slept in a bed for a week, had reached the point where she was going to take her husband home whether the hospital agreed or not, and the hospital sensibly agreed. The Burrow did what the Burrow did. It rearranged itself around the wound. Bill repaired the scorched kitchen door without being asked and said nothing about it. The twins came home and were, for 3 whole days, almost quiet, and then could bear it no longer and rigged Arthur's convalescent armchair to recite compliments whenever he sat in it, so that the gentle man could not lower himself to rest without the chair murmuring, "You are a credit to your family, and that is a very fine dressing gown," and Arthur laughed until his chest hurt and made them leave it on. Percy took leave from the ministry, actual leave, and spent it doing the accounts that Arthur could not, and reading to him in the evenings the dry ministry reports Arthur loved, in a voice that cracked more often than the reports warranted. Ginny did not leave the house. She had been the one on the cellar stairs. She had seen the green light turned, and she said nothing about it to anyone, and Harry, who knew what it was to carry a thing too large to say, left a sherbet lemon outside her door the first night, the way he had once left one outside a frightened girl's door a lifetime ago, and in the morning it was gone, and that evening Ginny came and sat against his side on the sofa and watched the fire and did not speak, and that was its own kind of healing. And the house held. That was the thing Harry kept returning to in the long days of that recovery, watching his family close around its wounded heart the way a hand closes around a candle. The dark had come into the kitchen and spilled his father's blood on the flags, and the family had not shattered, and it had not fled, and it had not even for an hour stopped being itself. Molly still made too much breakfast. Arthur still wanted to know how the electricity worked. The clock still kept its 12th word. The war had done its worst that it knew how to do, had struck at the very center of the thing it most needed to break, and the thing had bent and bled and held, and gone on loving out loud at the top of its voice, which the dark could not do and could not understand and could not, in the end, defeat. It was during that week that Harry caught himself watching Hermione across the convalescent kitchen, and understood that the trouble he had been carrying for a year was not going to mend the way his father's chest was mending. She had appointed herself without discussion the keeper of Arthur's potions schedule and the household's morale and the growing pile of research that was going to save Harry's life. And she moved through the wounded house like the steady center of it, and she would stop a dozen times a day to put her hand flat between Arthur's shoulder blades when his breathing went short, the exact gesture Molly used, learned over 10 years of belonging. And every single time she did it, something turned over in Harry that he no longer had any honest name for but the true one. He said nothing. There was a war on and his father was gray in a chair that recited compliments. It was not the time. But he knew, watching her, that the not the time was running out, the way all the not the times were running out, and that a person who had nearly lost his father in a kitchen had no business pretending he had all the time in the world to say the things that were true. Dumbledore came to the Burrow himself when Arthur was well enough to sit up, and he came not as the chief warlock and not as the headmaster, but as an old man leaning on a younger man's strength, for his own right hand, Harry saw, was blackened and dead-looking, cursed, and he carried it the way Arthur carried the memory of the green light, carefully, as a thing that would one day finish what it had begun. He sat in the kitchen where the blood had been scrubbed from the flags, and he praised Molly's tea, and he asked after Arthur with what was plainly real feeling, and then he said, "I think it is time, Harry, that you and I spoke alone. There are things I have kept from you for your protection that you have earned the right to hear." "No," said Harry. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose. "Not alone," said Harry. He was 17 now, of age, a wand of his own and a vote in his own life, and he stood in the kitchen of the house that had bled for him with his family ranged behind him, and he did not raise his voice. "I've spent my whole life with people trying to get me on my own, sir. The hat, a book you sent me, a graveyard I didn't go to, the thing under your turban once. Everybody who's ever meant to use me has started by trying to peel me off from the people who love me, and I notice you've just done it too, in the gentlest possible way, the very first thing, before the tea was even cold. Things you kept from me for my protection, things I've earned the right to hear alone, just us, just you and the boy you've been steering since before he could walk." He shook his head. "Whatever you've got to say about my life, you can say it in front of the people whose lives it is. They've earned it more than I have. They paid for it on this floor last week." There was a silence. Molly's chin came up. Arthur, pale in his chair, put his good hand over his wife's. Hermione stood at Harry's shoulder where she had stood since they were 6. And Albus Dumbledore looked at the boy he had set on a doorstep 16 years before and meant to forge into a lonely weapon, and looked at the family the boy had been forged into instead, and something in the old face gave way, some last wall, and he bowed his head. "Yes," he said. "Yes, of course, you are right. You have been right. I begin to think about a great many things for a great many years, and I have been too proud and too frightened and too much in the habit of solitude to hear it. Sit, then. All of you, and I will tell you the truth, which is a thing I have told to no living soul in its entirety, because I learned a long time ago that a secret shared is a secret that can hurt the one you share it with, and so I have hurt only myself with it, and called that nobility, when it was nothing but the loneliness of a man who never learned to do what your family does as easily as breathing." He told them the prophecy first. He told them of a night before Harry was born, and a seer's voice, and words that had doomed a family. That one would be born with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, born to those who had thrice defied him, born as the 7th month died. That Voldemort had heard half of it and had chosen, out of all the children it might mean, the Potter's son, and had marked him as his equal, and that the prophecy ended in words Dumbledore spoke very quietly into the silent kitchen. "Neither can live while the other survives. Either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. So it's him or me," said Harry. "In the end, one of us kills the other." "In the end," said Dumbledore, "yes." "Right," said Hermione in the flat, clear voice, and Harry knew that voice, knew she had been doing arithmetic all through the telling, knew she had reached the bottom of something and did not like what was there. "But that's not the part you kept from him for his protection. A prophecy that says he has to fight Voldemort isn't a secret you need to peel him off his family to tell him. We've known he'd have to face Voldemort since we were 6. That's not the truth you came here carrying in your dead hand, Professor." She stepped forward, 17 years old, the cleverest person ever to stand in that kitchen, and she said the thing aloud at last, the thing that had been growing and waiting since a lead box in a shed and a word torn out of a fleeing shade. "It's the scar, isn't it? There's a piece of him in the scar. Harry's a Horcrux. That's what the diary was, and the locket, and the others you've been hunting alone all these years. Pieces of his soul hidden in things so he can't die, and one of them got made by accident the night he tried to kill a baby and his own curse rebounded, and it lodged in the only living thing in the room. Harry's been carrying a piece of Voldemort's soul in his head his whole life, and it can't be destroyed while it's in there, and you can't kill Voldemort for good while that piece survives, which means—" She stopped. She could not say it. It was the only time in Harry's life he ever saw Hermione Granger reach the bottom of a problem and refuse, with her whole soul, to speak the answer she had found. "Which means," said Dumbledore, and his voice was very old and very tired, "that in order for Voldemort to die, the piece of him within Harry must also die. and the only certain way for that to happen, I had long believed, was for Harry to meet Voldemort and to let Voldemort strike and to fall. The kitchen was utterly still. Somewhere outside a chicken complained. Molly had both hands pressed over her mouth. Ginny had gone white, and Harry stood and looked at the kind old face and felt not the shock the old man plainly expected, but a strange cold clarity, the clarity of a thing finally named that you have felt in the dark for years. That's what the book was for, Harry said slowly. Champions of the light, wizards who stood alone and won and died doing it and were loved after, too late. You sent a 10-year-old a beautiful book about how the noblest thing a person can do is walk into death alone, because you needed me to grow up believing it. You've been getting me ready to die since before I could read. That was the plan on the doorstep. A childhood of hardship at my aunt's to make me humble and grateful and used to suffering, and then a hero's education alone, so that when the day came I'd lay my life down quietly and call it the right thing. He was not shouting. He had never in his life felt less like shouting. You weren't raising a boy, sir, you were raising a sacrifice, gently, with real fondness. I believe that, I do, but a pig for the slaughter, raised kind so it wouldn't bolt at the end. Harry, Molly began in a voice like a wound. It's all right, Mum, said Harry, and he reached back without looking and found her hand and held it. It's all right, because it didn't work. He looked at Dumbledore, and now there was something in his face that made the old man's eyes go bright. That's the thing you got wrong, sir, right at the start, the one sum you could never make come out. You put me on that doorstep to be raised lonely and grateful, and instead I got raised here. I got a mum who'd take a number from the Dark Lord, and a dad who runs from a held door, and a brother who throws a chess game, and a sister who doubles a potion in a fire, and a whole crooked house that grows a new room every time there's someone to love. You needed me to grow up believing the great ones die alone. And the one thing this family has taught me every single day of my life, on purpose in 100 small ways since before I could remember, is that nobody has to do anything alone. You raised a sacrifice, they raised a son, and a son doesn't lie down and die because a wise old man decided years ago that it would tie off his plot most neatly. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was not steady. No, he said. No, I see that he does not. I confess to you, Harry, that for 16 years I have watched my own design fail, thread by thread in this house, and I have not known whether to grieve it or to thank God for it. I told myself I had made a terrible error, the day I let Molly Weasley shame me out of my own plan in this very kitchen. I told myself I had lost control of the most important piece on the board, and perhaps I had. But I am an old man now, with a year to live at the most. This hand will see to that, and I find at the end that the piece I could not control is the only piece that ever gave me hope. Because my plan, Harry, my careful, lonely, 16-year plan, ended in your death, and I no longer believe that is the only ending. I believe it because of you. Because a boy I raised to die alone is standing in a kitchen refusing to, surrounded by people who would tear the world apart before they let him, and I have lived 100 years, and I have never once, not with all my cleverness, commanded a force 1/10 as strong as the thing in this room. If there is another way, Harry, it will not be found by a man who works alone in the dark. It will be found by you, by all of you, together. He looked at the clock at the 12th word. I have spent my whole life believing that the heaviest things must be carried alone. I think it may have been the central mistake of my life, and I think I have just watched it being corrected by a family of redheads and a girl with a great deal of hair, and I am old enough at last to be glad of it. When Dumbledore had gone, leaning on McGonagall, his dead hand cradled, the family sat a long time in the kitchen without speaking, and then they did the thing the family always did with a thing too big to carry, which was to break it into pieces small enough for many hands. He's wrong that there's no other way, said Hermione, who had not stopped thinking since the word Horcrux had left her own mouth. Or rather, he's right that his way is the only way he could find alone, which is exactly the kind of thing that's been true about him his whole life. There's a thread he hasn't pulled, the rebirth. 4 years ago in the graveyard, the ritual took Harry's blood, didn't it, to make the new body? We always knew that. Harry's blood, with Lily's protection in it, the protection a whole family kept burning. Voldemort took it into himself to tie Harry down so the old magic couldn't save him again. Her eyes had gone far away, doing the thing they did, the arrows connecting. But you don't get to take a thing like that and only have the half you want. He took the protection into his own body, which means as long as he's alive, the protection lives too in him, anchoring Harry to life through the very enemy who's supposed to kill him. I don't have it all yet. I need books we haven't got, and probably some we'll have to steal. But there's a loophole, Harry. I can feel the shape of it. The love they poured into you didn't just save you when you were a baby. It's been compounding like interest for 16 years in your blood and now in his, and I don't think a man who's never been loved a day in his life has the first idea what he let into himself when he took it. She looked up, fierce and certain. He thinks he made himself deathless. I think he made himself the one thing he can't survive. We just have to prove it, and we will. Because I am extremely good at proving things, and I have never wanted to prove one this badly in my life. It was the kind of hope you could work with, which was the only kind the family trusted, and they took it up gratefully and began, that very night, to plan, and it was very late when the kitchen finally emptied, one by one, up the crooked stairs to bed. Harry did not sleep. He had not expected to. After a while he gave it up and went, in the dark, by old habit, skipping the stairs that groaned, out to the orchard, where the apple trees stood up black against a sky thick with the same stars that had floated over the lake the night he was sorted, and the apple crate goals still leaned at either end of the longest gap, weathered gray now, too small for the people who had grown up shooting between them, kept anyway because the Burrow kept things. He was not surprised to find her there. He had stopped being surprised to find her there a very long time ago. She was sitting on the orchard wall in the otter jumper that did not fit anymore and that she wore anyway, her knees drawn up, looking at the stars, and she did not turn when he came, because she knew his step the way Molly knew Arthur's. Couldn't sleep, she said. It was not a question. It never was. Couldn't sleep, he agreed, and sat down beside her on the wall, close, the way they had sat on a drafty window seat 10 years before, and they looked at the stars. For a while neither of them said anything, and it was the good kind of nothing, the kind they had been fluent in since they were 6. Then Hermione said, without looking at him, in a voice that was not quite steady, which was so rare from her that it stopped his heart, "Today," he said, "you might have to die, for a piece of him in your head." And I sat in that kitchen and I did the arithmetic, the way I always do, all the way to the bottom. And Harry, I got to the bottom of it, and there was a thing there I've been refusing to look at for about a year because there's been no good time and there is never going to be a good time. And I'm sick of refusing to look at things. We don't do that. This family doesn't do that. She turned then and looked at him, the furious, clever, frightened, brave face he had memorized without meaning to, the girl from the doorstep, his sister, his anchor, the otter who held on so as not to drift. "I'm in love with you. I have been for ages. I don't know exactly when it stopped being the other thing and started being this. It doesn't have a date. It's not in any of my notes, which has been driving me mad. And I wasn't going to say it because because there are about 9 reasons it's complicated and I've listed them. But you might have to walk into the dark, and I am not going to be a person who knew a thing this true and didn't say it because the timing was bad. So, there, that's the thing at the bottom. I'm in love with you, Harry Potter. You can do whatever you like with that." Harry looked at her on the orchard wall under the stars in the jumper that didn't fit, and he felt the thing he had been carrying badly for a year set itself down at last, gently, exactly where it belonged. "You know the maddest part," he said, and his voice was rough. "I had this whole thing worked out, about how I couldn't tell you. About how it was the one thing I couldn't bring to you, because you're the person I bring everything to, and what if it broke that, and I'd lie awake making it complicated, 9 reasons, probably the same 9. He reached over slowly and took her hand off her knee, the hand that had anchored him through every storm since the cold hall where she asked his name, and he held it in both of his, the way she had held the King Arthur book, the way she had held the little wooden box, the way you hold a thing you have decided you cannot lose. And the whole time the answer was the easiest thing in the world. It was always you, from the doorstep. I just didn't have the word for it when I was 6, and then I had too many words and they all got in the way." He looked at her, the orchard, the stars, the whole crooked happy house of his life sleeping behind them. "I love you, not instead of being your family, as well as there's room. There's always room, that's the thing Mum knows that nobody else knows. I've loved you as my sister and my best friend and the cleverest person ever to sit at our table, and now I love you like this as well, and none of it cancels, it adds on. We add on. It's the only thing this family's ever known how to do." And Hermione Granger made a sound that was half a laugh and half the other thing, the sound she had made in a ring of ice when they were 6 and he was not afraid of her. And she leaned in, or he did, neither of them could ever afterward agree which, and on the orchard wall under the northern stars, 2 people who had between them lost 4 parents and found one family and saved each other's lives more times than the notebook could hold, kissed for the first time, carefully and then not carefully at all. And the apple trees stood witness, and the old crate goals laned in the dark, and far off across the marsh an owl called once and was answered. When they finally went in hand, skipping the stairs that groaned out of an old habit that no longer needed to be a secret and somehow was anyway, the clock on the kitchen wall was the only thing awake to see them. And it did a thing it had never done before and would never quite explain, which was that 2 of its hands, the stag and the otter, the boy who had known and the girl who had learned, drifted very slightly across its golden face, away from where they had always sat among the others, and came to rest side by side, touching, pointing together at the 12th word, the one Molly had charmed there years ago in a hospital wing and never explained, the word that was on no other clock in the world, together. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, the reckoning, the end of the war began, as so much in Harry's life had begun, at the kitchen table of the Burrow, with a great deal of tea and the whole family arguing about how to save his life. It was spring. The war had grown all that winter like a stain spreading through cloth, the disappearances, the cold, dead-eyed silence where the news used to be, the ministry fallen in all but name to people who wore the bone masks under their good robes now. And through that winter the family had done what the family did, which was to refuse, stubbornly, ordinarily, to let the dark have the last word in its own house. They had taken in the hunted, the Burrow had slept 14 some nights, refugees on the floors, a Muggle-born family in the orchard tent, an old wizard in the shed among Arthur's plugs. They had fought, all of them in the loose, fierce way of the Order. And they had hunted quietly, the thing Hermione had set them after the night Dumbledore confessed in their kitchen, the pieces. For Hermione had been right, as Hermione was right about the shape of the loophole, and once she had the shape she had pulled the thread until the whole of it came out. The external Horcruxes, the scattered pieces of Voldemort's torn soul, could be destroyed and had been, one by one, over that long winter, by a family that worked together where a great lonely wizard had worked alone. Dumbledore had spent years finding 2 of them and dying of one. The Weasleys and Hermione Granger had found and unmade the rest in a single winter, because Bill knew curses and Hermione knew everything and Arthur knew how to think sideways and the twins could get into anywhere, and Ron could see the lines on a board that no one else could see, and because a problem broken into many hands is a different and smaller problem than a problem carried alone. A cup, a diadem, a ring already cracked, a locket like a wrong note that Harry had felt in a lead box in a shed when he was 9. Gone, all of them, all but one, the piece in Harry. "He doesn't know we've got the others," Hermione said, at the table the morning it became clear the end was near, her research spread across the scrubbed wood in towers of parchment, her hair a great cloud, a smear of ink on her cheek that Harry wanted to thumb away and did not because Molly was watching and some things were still private even now. "That's our one advantage and it won't last. The moment he reaches for a Horcrux and finds it dead, he'll know and he'll go mad, properly mad, the careful goes out of him, so we have until he checks, days maybe. And then there's only the piece in you and he is the only person in the world who can destroy it because it's his and the magic that binds it answers only to him." "So the old plan was right," said Harry quietly. "He has to be the one to kill it, by killing me." "No," said Hermione, and she put her hand flat on the table, the gesture, the bottom of the problem gesture, and her eyes were bright and certain. "Listen, properly. This is the part I've been building all winter and I've checked it every way there is. When the curse hits a Horcrux it destroys the container, that's true, but you are not ajar, Harry. You're alive and you're loved, and 4 years ago he took your blood into his own body, your blood with the protection in it, the protection a whole family has fed and banked and kept alight for 17 years, so you are tethered to life through him. While he lives you cannot wholly die because he is carrying the very thing that saves you inside himself like a hostage he doesn't know he's taken." She leaned forward. "If he strikes you with the killing curse, I believe I have proved to myself as far as a thing can be proved, that it will kill only the piece of him in you. Not you, the Horcrux dies, you live, and then he is mortal, all his pieces gone, an ordinary man who can be beaten by an ordinary spell, and the prophecy is satisfied because the piece of him that was in you died at his own hand, by the curse he cast." The kitchen was silent. Arthur, mended now but moving carefully, leaned forward. "You're asking him to stand and take a killing curse," he said, "on a theory." "On a proof," said Hermione, "but yes, and here's the part that matters, the part that makes it different from the old man's plan, the part I will not let anyone forget." She looked round at all of them. Dumbledore's plan needed Harry to go willing to die. To walk into the dark having made his peace, a martyr alone, because he believed it was the only way, and because he'd been raised to believe dying for it was the noblest thing he could do. That plan kills Harry in his heart even if his body survives, because it asks him to give up on living. Her voice did not waver. "Mine needs the opposite. Harry has to stand in front of that curse, not willing to die but determined to live. He has to take it the way you take a wave you know you can swim, because he wants, more than anything in the world, to come back to us. The old plan ran on a boy who had nothing to lose. Mine runs on a man who has everything and knows it and is coming home after. It's the same act and it's the exact opposite act, and the difference is the whole war." Harry looked at her and then at the family around the table, at the faces he had known his whole remembered life, and he understood that she had not just found a loophole in a piece of dark magic. She had found the loophole in his whole childhood, the flaw in the lonely hero story they had all been trying to write him into since the doorstep, and she had found it the only way it could ever have been found, which was by someone who loved him and refused, on principle, to let him be alone. "All right," said Harry, "then that's the plan." He reached across the towers of parchment and took her inky hand in front of Molly and everyone, because the time for some things being private was past. "I take the curse, wanting to live, coming home after." He looked at them all. "But I take it surrounded, not alone in some dark forest making my peace. I take it with all of you there, every hand, because the whole thing only works if I want to come back, and I'll want it most if I can see exactly what I'm coming back to." "Together," said Ginny fiercely from the end of the table. "Together," said the family, and it was not a word any more in that kitchen, it was a law of nature, and on the wall the clock heard it and held all its hands steady, and they went to war. He found out the others were gone on a night at the very end of spring, and he came for Hogwarts before the moon was up, because the careful had gone out of him exactly as Hermione had said it would, and what was left was the oldest and stupidest thing in the world, which is fury that has run out of patience. The school had become the last fortress of the light, and the light had gathered there, the order and the teachers and the of-age students who would not be sent home, and the whole loud tribe of Weasleys, because where else would they be? They had known he would come. They had not known it would be that night, but the Burrow had drilled them, and Hogwarts under McGonagall drilled like the Burrow grown vast, and when the wards of the school screamed under the first assault, the castle did not panic, the castle deployed. What followed Harry would never be able to tell as a story, only as fragments, the way you remember a fever, the great doors buckling. The suits of armor Ron had wondered about on his first night marching down the moving stairs to fight, spell light turning the dark of the grounds to a lurching daylight, giants at the walls and spiders out of the forest and the bone-masked figures pouring through every breach, and against them the light, ragged and outnumbered and absolutely unwilling to break. The family fought as the family did, which was together, which turned out to be the most dangerous formation on the field. They had spent their whole lives learning each other's angles on an orchard pitch and a chessboard and at 3 high windows on an August night, and now it told. Bill and Arthur held a corridor back to back. Molly was a terror at the foot of the grand staircase, planted there like the wrath at her own kitchen door, and the bone masks learned to go round. The twins fought side by side and finished each other's spells the way they finished each other's sentences. And when a falling wall came down where George stood, it was Fred who hauled him clear by the collar with half a second to spare, the two of them rolling in the rubble, and Fred looked at the place his brother had been standing and at his brother gasping beside him and went, for once in his life, completely white and completely silent, and then hauled George up and they fought on, closer than ever. Never again that night more than an arm's length apart. Harry fought with Hermione on his left and Ron on his right, the formation of a lifetime, and Ginny fell in on Hermione's far side, and the 4 of them cut across that battlefield toward the thing they had come to do, and the orchard was in Harry's hands, and the years of catching walnuts and his holly wand sang. And then, when the night was at its blackest and the light was failing and the dead were too many on both sides, the fighting stopped. It stopped because his voice came, magnified, into every ear and every stone of the castle, the high cold voice that had learned to speak, and it said that the slaughter was not what he wished, that he valued magical blood and grieved to see it spilt. It said the defenders had fought valiantly, and that he would call back his forces for 1 hour to let them tend their dead. And it said that they had one thing he wanted, one boy, and that if Harry Potter gave himself up, came alone to the Forbidden Forest before the hour was out, no one else need die. It said almost gently that Harry Potter had let them all fight and bleed and fall in his place while he hid, and that the brave thing, the noble thing, the only decent thing left, was for the boy to come and face his fate alone. And the silence after it was the worst sound Harry had ever heard, because he could feel it working, feel the oldest story in the world reaching for him again, the one the hat had told and the book had told and the graveyard had told and Dumbledore had spent a childhood telling. The great ones go alone. Go to the forest, go to your death, make your peace. Walk into the dark by yourself, the way the heroes always do, and let it be over. He felt every eye in the ruined hall turn to him. He felt the pull of it, the awful seduction of being, at last, the lonely sacrifice the whole world kept insisting he was meant to be. And then Hermione Granger took his hand hard and Ron took his shoulder, and Ginny stepped in close, and across the wreck of the hall Molly was already shouldering toward him through the crowd with Arthur behind her, and the family closed around Harry Potter in the ruin of the great hall, the way it had closed around a baby in a crooked kitchen 17 years before, and the pull of the lonely story broke against them and could not reach him, and Harry surfaced from it in breath. "You're not going alone," said Hermione. It was not a question and it was not a plea, it was the law of nature again. "No," Harry agreed, "I'm not." He looked at them, his family, soot-streaked and bleeding and alive, in the broken hall under the enchanted ceiling that showed through the smoke a single hard star. "But I am going, the plan's the plan. He has to cast it, and he has to cast it at me. That's the only way the peace dies, so I go to the forest." And he thinks he's getting the lonely boy walking to his death, because that's the only story he's ever been able to imagine, the same as Dumbledore, the same as all of them, person with nothing, walking into the dark with nothing, alone. He gripped Hermione's hand, and instead he gets a man with everything who's coming straight back. "You'll be behind me the whole way, every one of you, I'll know it, that's the whole trick. He spent 17 years trying to make me face him with nothing. And I'm going to face him with all of you at my back, which he will never see, because it's the one thing in the universe he has never once been able to see." Molly took his face in both her hands, the way she had on a garden path when he was 15 months old, the way she had in a hospital wing, taking inventory of her child, and her eyes were streaming and her voice did not shake. "You come back," said Molly Weasley. "You hear me, Harry? You take whatever you have to take and you come back to this family, because there is a place at this table that is yours and it stays yours, and I am not setting another plate at an empty chair, not for you, not ever. You come home." "I'm coming home, Mum," said Harry, and he kissed her cheek, and he kissed Hermione once in front of all of them in the whole ruined world, and he turned, and he walked out of the castle toward the dark forest, and behind him, silent in the smoke, the family followed him as far as the trees and stopped at the tree line because the plan was the plan, and stood there, every hand of the clock made flesh, and watched him go in. The clearing was deep in the forest, ringed with the bone masks and the great dark shapes of giants, and at its center stood Lord Voldemort, tall and white and noseless, the Holly Wand's brother in his long pale fingers, and when Harry stepped into the firelight a hiss of triumph went round the ring, and the cold voice said, "Harry Potter, the boy who lived, come to die." Harry looked at him. He had imagined this moment his whole life in 100 shapes, and now that it was here he found he was not afraid, because fear is the cold rushing into an empty place, and there was no empty place in him. There had not been since a baby took hold of a strand of red hair. The whole house of him was full. "I've come," said Harry. "I didn't say to die." Voldemort's red eyes narrowed. He had wanted begging or defiance or a martyr's calm. He had wanted, Harry understood, some version of the lonely hero, because the lonely hero was the only kind of opponent he had ever known how to face. He did not know what to do with a boy who simply stood there, full and unafraid and faintly, maddeningly at peace. "Brave words," Voldemort said, "from a child who let his friends die in his place." "They're not in my place," said Harry. "That's the whole thing you've never understood in 17 years of trying to kill me. There isn't a place that's only mine. There never was. You made yourself into pieces so you'd never have to share your soul with anyone, and you call that strength, and it's the weakest thing I've ever seen. You're the loneliest creature in the world. You did it to yourself on purpose, and you genuinely think that makes you strong." Harry let his wand hang at his side, not raised, because the plan was the plan, and the plan needed the curse. "I almost feel sorry for you. Nobody's ever going to cross a room for you. Nobody ever did. That's the thing you should have been frightened of your whole life, and you were too busy being frightened of dying to notice you'd never once lived." "Enough," said Voldemort, and raised the pale wand, and the red eyes blazed, and the last thing Harry did before the green light came was the thing the whole plan turned on, the thing that was the opposite of everything the lonely story had ever asked of him. He thought with his whole heart of the kitchen and the clock and the people at the tree line at his back, and he did not make his peace. He made a promise, "I'm coming home," and he wanted with everything in him to live. The green light came and took him, and the world went white, and then it went away. He woke, if it was waking, in the kitchen of the Burrow. It was the kitchen, and it was not. It was the kitchen the way a thing is in a dream, lit gold and very quiet, the long scrubbed table and the range and the clock on the wall, all of it bright and clean and somehow more itself than the real one ever managed to be. And there was a pain, briefly, a wrongness, a thing being cast out, and on the floor under the table where the cat used to bite, there was a small twisted shuddering shape, dark and raw and pitiful, and it gave a thin cry and shriveled and was gone, and the kitchen was clean, and the wrongness Harry had carried since before he could remember. The splinter, the cold, the box in the shed went out of him for good, and left only Harry, only the full house of him, swept and bright. "Remarkable," said a voice gently, and Harry turned, and Albus Dumbledore was sitting at the table. He looked well. He looked better than Harry had ever seen him, both hands whole, the cursed black gone from the one, and Harry remembered distantly the winter, the failing, the funeral, and the snow that the whole school had stood for, and understood where he was and who this was, and that it was the last time. "Am I dead?" Harry asked. "I do not think so," said Dumbledore. "I think you are in the place between for a moment, while a thing of his is burned out of you. I think, Harry, that the young woman was entirely correct, in every particular, which I confess I find almost as astonishing as the fact that I am pleased about it." He looked around the bright kitchen, at the clock, at the 12th word, and his eyes were very bright. "She is cleverer than I am. I say that as the cleverest man of my age. She found in a single winter, with love to help her, the answer I could not find in a lifetime of working alone, and the answer was that you did not have to die at all. I built your whole life around a sacrifice, Harry, and a 17-year-old girl unbuilt it with a library and a family, and a refusal to accept that the only way is the lonely way." He bowed his head. "I owe you an apology that the living me was too proud to make properly, and so I shall make it here, where pride no longer signifies. I was wrong, not in loving you. I did love you more than I let either of us see. I was wrong in believing that love meant carrying you to your death by the cleanest road. I had spent so long alone with the weight of the world that I had forgotten there was any other way to carry a heavy thing than alone. Your family remembered. They have spent 17 years teaching you the one lesson I most needed to learn and was most afraid of, and it has saved your life and the world's, and I am more grateful than I have words for, and more ashamed, and I am at peace, which I have not been for a very long time." Harry looked at the old man across the dream kitchen, and he found that he was not angry, that the anger had burned out of him with the splinter, and that what was left was something larger and sadder and kinder. "You weren't a bad man, sir," Harry said. "You were a lonely one. You did it all alone for so long you forgot it was the loneliness that was hurting you and not the work. I think that's the saddest thing there is. I think it's nearly what he is, and the only difference between you is that you loved people anyway, even when you didn't know how to let them help." He paused. "Thank you for letting me come here, to the Weasleys, whatever you meant by it. Best thing anyone ever did for me, even if you did it for the wrong reasons. It came out right, we add on. It's the only thing this family knows how to do, and it turns out it's enough to beat the worst thing in the world." Dumbledore's eyes shone. "Then go back, Harry," he said. "They are waiting at the tree line. They have been waiting at tree lines for your whole life, and they always will be, and that is the truest magic I have ever in a long, strange life been privileged to see. Go home, finish it. And Harry," he added, as the gold kitchen began to brighten and dissolve, and the real world pressed in cold and loud at the edges, "tell your mother her clock was right, about the 12th word. It is the only word that ever mattered. I have known it for 30 seconds, and I have understood more than I did in 100 years. And the kitchen went to light, and Harry came back. He came back to the cold forest floor and the smell of leaf mold and blood, and he kept his eyes shut and his body loose because the plan was not finished, and the next part of it was the hardest, which was to lie still and play dead at the feet of the thing that had killed his parents while it gloated over him. Voldemort was laughing. The high cold laugh went round the clearing, and the bone masks took it up, and the cold voice crowed that the boy who lived was dead at last, that the war was over, that there was no one now to stand against him. And then, because he could not resist the theater of it, because the proud always overreach, he ordered the body carried back to the castle, to the very tree line where the defenders waited to be shown to them, so that the last hope of the light could be broken in front of their eyes. It was Hagrid he made carry it. That was the one cruelty in it that nearly undid the plan, because Hagrid, forced at Wandpoint to gather up the boy he had carried from the wreck of Godric's Hollow 17 years before, the boy he had wept over on a kitchen floor, broke entirely, sobbing so that the whole forest could hear him, and Harry, dead in his arms, longed to tell him and could not, and let himself be carried limp through the dark trees toward the grey dawn and the waiting castle, and held to the plan. Because the plan was the only way home. They came out of the trees, and the defenders saw, and a sound went up from them that Harry would hear in his sleep for years, a single great cry of grief, and through it, cutting through it, he heard the voices he knew. He heard Ron roar, he heard Ginny scream his name, he heard Molly somewhere make a sound with no name in it at all. And he heard closest terribly Hermione, who did not scream, who said, in a voice gone high and cracked and absolutely certain even now, even at the worst, "No, no, he's coming back, I proved it, he's coming back," holding to the arithmetic with her whole soul, because the arithmetic was all that stood between her and the dark, and Harry, hanging dead in Hagrid's arms, made himself a promise for the second time that night and kept it. Voldemort was speaking again, offering the defenders their lives, telling them their hero was dead and their cause was lost, when Harry rolled out of Hagrid's arms, landed on his feet and stood up. The clearing froze, Voldemort spun, and Harry Potter, alive, whole, the splinter gone, the cold burned out of him for good, stood in the grey dawn before the ruined castle with his family at his back and raised the holly wand. "I told you," said Harry into the ringing silence, and his voice carried to every stone and every soul, "I told you I came to live. What followed was not a long duel, because it did not need to be." The defenders surged, and the bone masks broke, and the giants turned, and across the suddenly roaring battlefield Harry and Voldemort faced each other alone in a clearing of stillness. The holly wand and its brother, the full boy and the empty thing, exactly as it had always, since a cottage at Godric's Hollow, been meant to end. "You cannot win," Voldemort hissed, and there was, under the fury at last, the thing Harry had told him to be afraid of, the thing creeping in cold and certain fear. "I am the most powerful wizard who has ever lived. I made myself deathless. I cannot die." "You made yourself unlovable," said Harry. "That's not the same as deathless, though I can see how you get them mixed up. You never had either explained to you properly." He kept his wand level and his eyes steady, and he felt, behind him, the whole weight of his life, the clock and the kitchen and the orchard and the people at the tree line, all of it, in his blood and his bones and his wand hand. "You took my blood 4 years ago to make yourself strong. And you took the protection with it, the love a whole family had kept burning in me for 17 years, and you carried it into your own body without ever once understanding what it was, because you've never felt it in your life and couldn't recognize it if it killed you." He breathed, "which it's about to. Go on, cast it. Cast the green light the way you did at my mother. And watch what love does to it the second time. Now there's 17 years more of it." Voldemort screamed the curse. The green light leapt from the pale wand, and it met in the air between them, the thing that had beaten it once before in a cottage 17 years gone and had only grown since, the old magic, the blood magic, the ordinary impossible magic of a baby loved and a clock that grew a hand and a marigold jumper with a stag on it, the love the Dark Lord himself had taken into his own body like a fool swallowing his own poison, and the green light recoiled from the boy it could not touch and could not claim, and turned in the air, and went home to the hand that cast it, the way it always in the end comes home. And Lord Voldemort fell to the forest floor, an ordinary mortal man at the last, all his pieces gone, struck down by his own death cast back at him by a love he had carried and never once felt, and he died as he had lived, alone, with not one creature in all the world to cross a clearing for him, and the war was over. For a moment there was only silence in the gray dawn. Then Harry turned, and the family broke from the tree line and crossed the bloody ground at a dead run, all of them, and Hermione reached him first. She always reached him first, she had a sense for it. And Harry Potter caught his whole crashing, weeping, shouting family in his arms in the dawn of the day the dark ended, and held on and was held, and did not let go for a very long time. The summer after the war, the Burrow held a party in the orchard, and it was the loudest thing that crooked old house had ever produced, which was saying a very great deal. It was not a victory party. Molly was firm on that. Too many were missing for it to be victory. The war had taken its share of the order of the school of families up and down the country, and the Burrow had spent that spring doing what it did, which was opening its doors to the grieving and setting more places at the table. And you did not, Molly said, dance on a victory built of other people's empty chairs. It was instead a party for being alive, which was a different thing and a humbler one, and the only kind worth having. It was for the living and for remembering the dead by name, and for the simple, outrageous fact that the sun had come up on a world without Lord Voldemort in it, and that there were sausages. They had set a long table down the middle of the orchard between the apple trees, under the old crate goals that no one would ever take down, and it was crowded the way the Burrow's table was always crowded, elbow to elbow, one too many chairs, the place Molly always kept for whoever might come. Arthur sat at the head, mended, gone a little gray at the temples from the green light he had turned from his daughter, and beside him Molly, and down the sides the whole tribe of them, Bill and his French wife, Charlie home from his dragons, Percy who had wept in this kitchen and been forgiven, Fred and George who now sat always within an arm's length of each other and made jokes about it so they would not have to make the other thing about it, Ron, Ginny, and the cousins and the refugees who had become. Over a hard winter, simply the family, because that was how the family worked. You came in cold and frightened, and one day you looked up and you were on the clock. Harry sat where he had always sat, between Ron and the wall, where Molly had put him as a baby so she could keep an eye on him, and across from him sat Hermione, the inky girl from the doorstep, his anchor, his partner, the cleverest person ever to sit at that table, and the one who had unbuilt his death with a library and a refusal. And under the table her foot was hooked around his ankle, the otters holding on so as not to drift, and there was a ring on her finger now. Small and second-hand and exactly right, because some things you do not wait on, when you have learned as young as they had learned how little time the world promises anyone. Speech, demanded Ginny, banging the table, and the cry was taken up, speech, speech, until Harry, going red, was hauled to his feet by Ron on one side and Hermione's encouraging shove on the other. He stood at the loud, crowded table in the orchard, under the trees he had learned to fly between, and he looked at them all, the faces he had known his whole remembered life, and he did not have a speech, because Weasleys did not make speeches. They made too much breakfast and shook your hand like the postman and left sherbet lemons outside your door. And so he said the only true thing, which was the thing the whole story had been about from the beginning. From a baby on a garden path to a clearing in a forest at dawn. When I was small, Harry said, everyone kept trying to tell me I was special. The wizard who left me on the doorstep, the books, the hat, the villagers who looked at my scar, the thing in the forest in the end. They all had the same story about me, and it was always the same story, the special boy alone who does the great thing by himself and is loved for it after, too late to do him any good. He looked down the table. And the whole time this lot, he gestured, helpless at all of them, this whole crooked, impossible family, was telling me a completely different story every single day without ever once making a speech about it. They were telling me I wasn't special at all. I was just theirs, just one more place at the table, just Harry. And it turns out that was the strongest magic there ever was, and the dark could never see it coming, because the dark only knows how to be alone, and it cannot for the life of it understand a house that keeps building another room every time there's someone new to love. His voice went rough. I'm alive because you wouldn't let me be the lonely hero. I'm standing here because Mum would take a number from the Dark Lord, and Dad runs from a held door, and Ron throws a chess game, and Ginny watches the clock, and Hermione doubles the potion every single time, and nobody in this family has ever once let anybody face the dark alone. That's it, that's the whole of it, that's how we won. He raised his glass to the empty chairs and the people who should be in them, and to the ones who aren't empty, budge up, there's always room. Budge up, said the whole orchard, glasses raised, and they drank, and then the table dissolved into the good roar again, the immense, ordinary uproar of a family being a family, and Harry sat back down between Ron and the wall, and Hermione's hand found his across the table among the wreckage of the meal, and held on. He found Hermione somewhere in the middle of the evening, sitting on the orchard wall where she had once kept the score by wandlight and made sure that everyone got a turn at being good at something, and he climbed up beside her the way he had 1,000 times close, and they looked out at the long-lit table and the family roaring round it. Your Mum and Dad would have liked this, Harry said, both sets, all 4 of them, the whole loud lot of it. They would, said Hermione, and she did not flinch from it any more, the way she had flinched once on a cold doorstep. She had the little wooden box still, the one he had made her at 6, sanded and hinged in Arthur's shed. She kept it on the windowsill of the small room that the school had once addressed a letter to, and in it were the things of her parents she had carried through everything: a hair ribbon, a photograph, a recipe in her mother's hand. I keep them next to yours, the boxes. The way you said when we were 6, so they're not on their own in there. She leaned her head against his shoulder. 4 parents who don't get to be here, and this family who is. It doesn't cancel. You taught me that before either of us could spell it. It just adds on. Harry turned the ring on her finger, the small second-hand one, with his thumb. I keep thinking we should have waited, he said. Done it properly. We're 17. People will say we're mad. People have said we're mad since we were 6, said Hermione. A boy who walked into a ring of ice and wasn't afraid of me. We've never once done a single thing the timing was right for, and every single one of them has been the best decision I ever made, and I have made a careful study of decisions. She laced her fingers through his. I'm not waiting on the good things anymore, Harry. We learned what that costs. We've got a whole life now, a real one, a long, ordinary, boring, beautiful one if we're lucky, and I intend to spend it adding on in this house with these people, with you. That's not madness. That's the only sane thing I've ever heard of. She looked up at him, the inky girl from the doorstep, his anchor, the otter who held on. Budge up, there's room, there's always room. And Harry budged up, and she settled against him, and across the orchard the family roared on, and the apple trees that he had learned to fly between stood dark against the last of the light. And for a while the two of them said nothing at all, fluent, still, in the good kind of nothing they had spoken since they were 6. Later, when the long summer evening had gone gold and then blue, and the little ones had been carried in asleep, and the older ones sat out under the first stars with the bats coming out, Harry slipped into the kitchen for a moment alone, which in that house was a rare and precious thing, and he stood in front of the clock. It was the oldest thing they owned, the great battered golden clock with its words around the rim, home and school and lost and mortal peril, and the 12th word Molly had charmed onto it in a hospital wing years ago together. It had grown a hand for him the day he came, when it had never grown one for a stranger before, and a hand for Hermione the winter she came shaking to the door, and it had swung every hand to mortal peril on a night of bone masks and held his father's hand trembling on the edge of the unspeakable word until it crept home. And it had, on a night he and Hermione came in from the orchard, drifted 2 of its hands to touch, the stag and the otter, side by side. He looked at it now, all its hands, the whole family accounted for, and every single one of them, on that gold and ordinary summer night, in a world without Voldemort in it, at last, after everything, pointed home. Harry put his hand flat against the warm metal, the way he had once put it against the cold lid of a box in a vault that said, "We love you," and he thought of all of them, the living at the table and the dead in the chairs that stayed empty, his mother and his father who had lit the fire, and the family who had kept it burning, and the old lonely wizard who had set him here for the wrong reasons and lived just long enough to be glad of it, and the cleverest girl in the world who was, even now, calling his name from the orchard because she always knew when he had slipped away and never let him stay gone long. Coming, Harry called back to her, to all of them, to the only word on the clock that had ever mattered. And he went back out into the warm, loud, loving dark of the only home he had ever needed, under the apple trees, among his family, where there was always one too many chairs and never quite enough, where the table grew another foot whenever it had to, where nobody ever had to face a single thing alone, and the clock on the wall behind him kept all its hands at home, where they would stay, through all the long, ordinary, happy years that came after, for the rest of their lives. Chapter 7 End.